Rifenheim, the capital of the Antares Empire, was surrounded by fire on all sides. The howls of the giant demons made my blood run cold. Brave warriors perished under the paws of monsters, like grapes under the feet of a winemaker. But despite the terrifying size of the monsters, the soldiers continued to fight, defending the capital. His Majesty, having learned that the battle with the demon had cost the lives of 2 million soldiers, gave an inspiring speech. "The Demon King may have destroyed our world, filling it with evil, but he will fall at the hands of great heroes," he declared loudly, and his words were drowned out by the general jubilation. Meanwhile, in the Abyss Hall of the Great Demon Palace, a confrontation was already underway. "Your crimes are over!" the fair-haired youth shouted. It was one of the heroes, Alex von Hollen, and he wouldn't let up. "It's time to return to the darkness, you fiend of hell." From the throne, the Demon King Refenhart looked boredly at the entire squad of heroes, including the screaming Alex. "Demon King, we will destroy you, and your death will mark the fall of the evil empire," declared Cyrus the Holy Sword, preparing his weapon for battle. Riffenhart was annoyed that his empire, which he had put so much effort into, was being called evil when it had a decent name, Antares. Teslon, the king of martial arts, ignored Riefenhart's caustic remark and promised to destroy him and all the vicious monsters that came from the underworld. The Demon King thought about how stupid it was to call monsters vicious when all he had done was teach them human tactics to fight back against the oppression they had been subjected to for as long as they could remember. "Have you already slain the 4 heavenly kings?" he asked the heroes. "Yes, these filthy orcs are no match for my sword," Cyrus replied. "Are you saying that even the brave great orc Takid has been defeated?" Riefenhart exclaimed in bewilderment. The Demon King knew about the friendliness of the orcs, their loyalty and mutual assistance, which was difficult to combine with the terrible smell. But nevertheless, calling them monsters is unfair. Teslon, smiling, came to the conclusion that the 4 heavenly kings were just trolls who got what they deserved for their sins. "Even Garut Atika is dead," said Riefenhart, remembering that trolls look scary, but they are also kind and close to nature and the spirits of their ancestors. "The evil dwarf who worshipped the god of darkness was also called to account for his deeds," St. Flynn said almost tenderly. "Even Mashelin was finished off?" The Demon King sighed, mentally accusing the people of arrogance, because the god of the gnomes, All, was the same god of darkness as he was a ballerina. Riefenhart's thoughts were interrupted by the boastful speech of the light mage Jade about how his techniques were too much for the vicious dark elf. The Demon King shuddered, as the memories of the beautiful elf painfully stabbed him in the heart. "And Cirrus too?" he roared, calling upon his magic. "You're practically begging for death." Those present were not surprised by his antics, and Teslon only chuckled when Riefenhart tried to explain that Cirrus's skin had only become darker because of the need to flee to the Badlands after humans cut down all the trees in her area. "You are accusing a pure-blooded elf with dark skin?" the Demon King said in disappointment. The squad of heroes, fully armed, ignoring Riefenhart's speeches, rushed into battle under Alex's furious cry that all the fallen would be avenged with the help of his sword. After making sure that they were not going to listen to him, the Demon King asked the heroes who would avenge the rest of the fallen, breaking into a mad smile. The fair-haired hero shouted something about Riefenhart's meanness, and that if it weren't for him, the monsters wouldn't have gone over to the evil side, continuing to live their normal lives. The frustrated Demon King called upon his strength, convinced of the futility of small talk with the heroes. As Alex rushed towards him with his sword, Riefenhart thought about how any non-human species that did not agree to live the life of a slave immediately became an excellent target for extermination and a servant of darkness. Riefenhart became humble and willing to play his part. "I will become the Demon King you want me to be," he roared, sending a powerful blast of his power towards the heroes. The room shook and the palace walls of the hall shattered into pieces, burying a squad of good warriors underneath them. Tears streamed down Riefenhart's face, but his expression remained stony, as if resentment had frozen him from within. He always considered himself a very ordinary magician, although this does not fit with the greatness imposed on him. And I never understood why people so stubbornly refuse to recognize other intelligent races as equals. For them, elves are servants who were simply lucky enough to live a little longer than people. Dwarves and orcs are nothing more than labor, useful in the mines or as heavy draft animals. And trolls are generally used as components of healing potions. Riefenhart was deeply impressed when he discovered the culture and roots of the so-called monsters. He was very inspired when he was able to get to know them better, study them, and understand them. The Demon King was given access to the magic of spirits by the elves and trolls. Combining their knowledge, He became the first in history to reach the 10th circle of magic. Riffenhard could no longer turn a blind eye to the relationship between humans and monsters, and began to help the latter, since they were in a more vulnerable position. The more the boundaries of Riefenhardt's aid expanded, the more attacks on monsters came from humans. The attacks did not stop until the demons learned to fight back and began to reclaim their lands. The lands grew larger and larger until they became the Antares Empire. The Riefenhardt Empire was built not on hatred of humans and a thirst for space, but on the belief that other species were no worse than humanity. The citizens of Antares simply wanted to live in peace on their land, but to the people their wishes were equated with the machinations of the devil. And everything probably wouldn't have been so bad if Riefenhardt hadn't considered the people's desire to exterminate orcs and goblins because of their less than pleasant appearance stupid and unacceptable. "It is my duty to protect the Empire," the Demon King proclaimed, sending a powerful spell towards the enemy. Alex was pierced by pain, and as if through a veil, he heard Riefenhardt speak about human laws that allowed senseless killings, and how he would create new ones. Alex's sword shattered, as if listening to the magician and refusing to participate in useless violence, and the hero himself collapsed dead onto the cold marble, finally hearing Teslan, not believing his eyes, scream his name. "I'm sure you've earned the title of heroes by achieving success with sword and magic, but in reality you lack mastery in both," the Demon King said out loud. And he thought to himself that most book heroes were frankly lucky to survive to the end. Only the king of martial arts, Teslan, known for his physical strength, remained alive. Riefenhardt thought that the rest of Teslan were no match for him, and that dealing with him would be a difficult task. While the Demon King was thinking about a profitable strategy, the martial arts king was already rushing towards him, tearing the air with powerful energy. Teslan knocked the ground out from under Riefenhardt with one blow, forcing him to learn the basics of levitation in the process. Without waiting for his opponent to come to his senses, the martial arts king once again gathered energy and prepared for a new strike. Teslan took pleasure in the fact that the dark mage barely survived his first attack. Another powerful blow, and Riefenhardt and Teslan leave the palace, leaving behind a huge hole in the wall. Riefenhardt seemed to come to his senses from the blow, and the martial artist sees how the enemy's rage oozes out of him with all the dark spells. Out of the corner of his eye, the Demon King notices an attack being prepared. Teslan puts all his pain and anguish into this blow to avenge the dead crew members. Riefenhardt manages to whisper a few words and makes mysterious movements with his hands. "Victory will be ours, Demon King Riefenhardt," the martial arts king roars loudly. The Demon King literally folds in half from Teslan's blow, but still looks at him with stubborn eyes. "Is that all you can do? I blocked your blow with magic," the mage taunts as Teslan pulls away. The Demon King thinks to himself, "Damn it, my spine is broken. I'm going to die now." While the martial arts king sentences Riefenhardt to a personal trial, the dark mage considers his chances of winning in his current state. "Okay, you win. Good for you," the Demon King concedes. "I suppose they are all now free of your evil spell," says Teslan, confident in his truth. In Riefenhardt's eyes, there is a realization that if he leaves, there will be no one to stand up for his people, buried under slander and hatred. Gritting his teeth, he gathers his last strength into a fist and thinks that he will never come to terms with the fact that a life of slavery for those who are not like ordinary people is the order of things. He grabs the Eye of Space and Time, an extremely powerful artifact that even he, a 10th Circle mage, has not yet fully figured out. "What are you trying to do?" Teslan exclaims. "A regression spell," Riefenhardt almost spits out the words. "It will turn back time and disrupt divine providence." "Try and stop me, martial arts king," the Demon King shouts, now completely under the spell's spell. Teslan makes one last push, exploding the ground beneath his feet. Riefenhardt directs a spell towards the enemy. "I can't afford to die," the martial arts king begins to think. "Not like that," the Demon King finishes. Teslan delivers the final blow straight into the center of the dark mage's spell. Riefenhardt casts the spell despite the fact that it causes him no less pain than his opponent. The world surrounding the magical duo begins to crumble into pieces. Knowing no mercy, ready to stand for goodness to the end, they seem to see themselves as a single whole, converging at one point. There is nothing left in the world except this bright point of the spell, which grows so quickly, as if the moon is being pulled to the earth by a rope. And then comes a long, endless, bright night, and a silence that makes your ears ring and makes you want to clear your throat. The trills of birds cut through the oppressive silence. A cozy hunting lodge is visible in the forest. You can feel a light breeze playing with the curtains. The Demon King reluctantly opens his eyes and immediately asks himself, "Am I still alive?" It turns out that the spell worked, which he didn't decipher even halfway. Well, who is he if not a damn genius? It seems that a time jump did occur, but I don't remember such a place in my past, the magician thought, analyzing where he could have ended up. And he asked himself another question that interested him. I wonder how old I am now. Looking at his body, he came to the conclusion that most guys would die of envy if they saw him in such shape. All that remains is to answer the main question, who are you? A mage only needs magic. What's the point of a six-pack? Riffenhart muttered under his breath, looking at the huge number of calluses and scars. The Demon King recalled the times of his youth, when every beauty's legs buckled at the sight of him, and the elves generally cried from his beauty. Looking at himself in the mirror, Riffenhart no longer saw the sharp features of his former face, because it now resembled something between a felt boot and a statue. The internal monologue did not stop even for a second. The Demon King doubted whether the spell of moving in time and space worked. He had definitely seen that stubborn look, those red eyebrows and pursed lips reflected in the mirror somewhere. What if the spell didn't send him back in time? But there was an exchange of souls between two bodies. The magician and his reflection simultaneously said, Teslan, literally a second later, as if mimicking the magician. He was also loudly called by the name of his recent enemy. Riffenhart turned to see a giant man trying to squeeze through the doorway. The sun is already high in the sky and you're still hanging around here? Why don't you go outside? The stranger asked in surprise, not noticing the frightened expression on Teslan's face. We have another great day ahead of us today, he continued joyfully. Who are you? The Demon King whispered in shock. Why are you looking at me as if you were seeing me for the first time? The giant said thoughtfully. Using the amnesia excuse a second time won't help you. I thought you knew it wouldn't work once. He interrupted Riffenhart's mutterings about not remembering anything. The giant hand of the new acquaintance grabbed Teslan by the head and pulled him out into the street. Let's go train, he announced enthusiastically, not wanting to waste time on stupid excuses. The magician immediately had an epiphany, and he realized that this was the strongest warrior of the continent of all times and peoples, and also Teslan's mentor. Riffenhart was ready to swear that this was the very same king of martial arts, Gerard Crom Protas. Coming out of his thoughts, the sorcerer realized that he was tied to a tree by his arms and legs. Attempts to persuade Gerard to listen to Riffenhart's story only resulted in his mouth being tied with some kind of dirty rag. So, let's begin training, Gerard announced, grabbing a bamboo stick. Riffenhart's heart began to pound wildly, and his eyes were filled with terror. Gerard delivered a powerful blow with the bamboo straight at the sorcerer's torso. The veins on his face formed a visible pattern. Tears gushed from his eyes, and only one thought was spinning in Riffenhart's head. Can someone explain what the hell is going on here? Without allowing his student even a little rest, Gerard continued to strike mercilessly. Is this how I'm going to die, Cirrus? The magician asked himself, replaying happy memories of the elf. At this time, the coach was trying to understand what was happening to his student today. If this is indeed amnesia, then it's not a big deal. Gerard himself has often fallen into unconsciousness from endless training. The Battle Clan is an indestructible gym without a break, where perseverance and hard work are valued. This means that there is only one solution to the problem, and it is trivial. Train the fighter harder, and he will recover faster. Gerard taught Teslan that weapons and equipment are only needed by weaklings who are unable to overcome difficulties. People are like steel. The more you hit them, the stronger they become, the coach shouted at Rieffenhart. Where is a man like steel? A cretin, the magician thought mockingly. Believe me, there are no limits to physical development. You can become steel. Gerard kept telling Teslan, whom he had once personally chosen as his student. The coach knew that just as quality iron becomes steel, only a select few can have a steel form. You are one of them, Teslan, Gerard declared, hitting his student in the face with a bamboo. Gerard beat him and asked him to imagine himself as an ocean, absorbing everything, but not changing its shape. Riffenhart sobbed, and imagined that his tears were the ocean in which he and the beautiful elf were splashing. When the magician was ready to die on the spot, the coach declared the end of the training and walked off into the sunset. Riffenhart sat for a long time among the bamboo debris, hugging himself by the shoulders and thanking all the gods that he had survived. Rieffenhart had a bathing session scheduled for the night. Petals and leaves of the geranium. Am I being bathed in a healing potion? The magician thought in surprise, remembering that one bottle of such a potion costs at least 10 silver. I heard that queens bathe in milk to get velvety skin, but that's nothing compared to this. What is this for? The Demon King asked the trainer. What do you mean? Steel always needs to be cooled after forging, Gerard answered confidently. After working through the entire musculoskeletal system on the brink of death, I quickly recover using the power of the aura and healing potions. the mage concluded, noting a working method for returning the body to shape before it breaks down. It was no wonder that Teslan had such a strong body when Reifenhart fought him, since the martial arts king had been through similar training since he was a child. Now the magician was finally convinced that he had traveled into the past. It remains to be seen how young Reifenhart is doing. The dark mage wondered if his younger self could exist, while his older soul was in the same dimension. Based on the current situation, there were only two assumptions. First, the elder Reifenhart in Teslan's body coexists with the now young Reifenhart. The second irritated and even slightly frightened the magician. The soul of a martial arts king could now be in the body of young Reifenhart. "Dinner is served," the coach roared, pointing Reifenhart to the dining table filled with pork hams. Gerard continued to preach about the benefits of replenishing the supply of nutrients to the overworked body when the magician had already pounced on the food. After lunch, the coach and student went for a run in the mountains, having first loaded Reifenhart with a backpack filled with stones. The trainer didn't allow him to take off his backpack when he forced the sorcerer to do push-ups using only his little fingers. With the same backpack, he did exercises on the edge of the abyss, while Gerard yawned and mocked Teslan's fatigue. After a walk in the mountains, the dark magician could not make his brain work, but it was vital to think. "I have reincarnated as the Teslan from the past," Reifenhart concluded wearily once again. There were many questions. How will this affect the future? What will happen if I run away right now? What if I meet myself? The uniqueness of the soul is the immutable rule underlying this world, and it can cease to exist at the slightest mistake. It is almost impossible to encounter little Reifenhart, because for the next 10 years he only studies magic and reads books in the Delphic Tower. But what if Teslan is now in Reifenhart's body? Who will use the time to good use and pump up the mage's puny body? Reifenhart thought, calculating the options for the king of martial arts to come for his soul. Without a coach, Teslan would not have achieved such success in the method of indestructible rocking of the body and aura, but his abilities should not be underestimated. In any case, the priority now is to escape from this madhouse, the magician concluded. He left his room and ran wherever his eyes looked. All he could think about was that he would never come back here again. Ahead, a trainer appeared, sitting on a rock with his arms crossed. He asked where his student was going at nightfall and added, "You've been suspiciously quiet for the last 2 months, and now you're running away again for the 9th time." "I'm really not Teslan," the sorcerer exploded. "My name is Reifenhart, and I'm a magician." "Oh, these true stories of yours that cannot be kept silent about," the coach sighed. "The last time you assured me that you came from another world, you told me about the gods and dragons you met," Gerard continued, while the magician froze in surprise. "What else was there? A great master from the Huang Empire in the east, from a place called Murim, who lives a second life or something?" the trainer asked mockingly. Gerard praised Reifenhart for his conviction in his current role. The next moment, the trainer's fingers closed on the magician's hair, and he dragged the fugitive back into the house after wishing him good night. Reifenhart admitted defeat with tears in his eyes, but promised himself never to give up and to leave this madhouse as soon as possible. The magician continued to try to escape, but each time the trainer found him and returned him to training. There was a feeling that you couldn't hide from him, either on land or in water. "Don't worry, just be patient a little longer. It will all pay off, I promise," Gerard repeated after another killer workout. Reifenhart resigned himself to the idea that it was simply impossible to escape from this eccentric because the word surrender did not exist in Gerard's lexicon. "Did you know that the indestructible gym has over 130 ways to prevent students from escaping?" the coach said with a smirk, while Reifenhart absorbed his words with hatred. "Throughout its history, there hasn't been a student who hasn't tried to escape or feign illness. This idiot will find me everywhere, so it will be easier to finish my studies and get official permission to leave the mountains," Reifenhart decided for himself. Therefore, the dark magician remained in this wonderful prison for 2 years. "Well done, student," the coach exclaimed as the chains slid to the ground. "Finally, you have awakened your aura," he continued enthusiastically. This news excited the magician, because even the recognized holy sword, Cyrus, was able to awaken the aura only in his 30s, and Reifenhart in Teslan's body was not yet 20. If you develop your survival instincts in parallel with your physical abilities, your will to live will increase your survival rate and manifest your power, known as aura, the trainer instructed, throwing away the club, no longer capable of causing pain to his student. Gerard announced the transition to the next stage of training, which made the now young magician very happy until he heard the following words. "You're in for a sparring match with me, buddy." Reifenhart watched in panic as his mentor gathered an aura around himself. He will remember this fight for a long time. as well as all the subsequent ones. Fast forward 3 years, and the sound of water can be heard in the middle of the southern mountains. The waterfall crashes down on the rocks with such force that some of them have already been worn down to the size of pebbles. And in the middle of this power stands a strong red-haired guy. He gathers all his aura into a fist. Riffenhart attempts a move called the Horn of Disaster. To do this, you need to concentrate all your strength in one point of your body. In this case, the concentrated aura has the appearance of a horn, hence the name of the strike. The mage exhales and strikes the rock hugging the waterfall. Exhale, and the usual thought that it seems he is not doing enough. I can't think that the third level is my limit. I have to advance to the fourth, Riefenhart encourages himself. The final stage of the Horn of Disaster is the ninth, calling forth 9 waves that can kill even a god. The Teslon that the magician fought in his time was at the 7th stage, and the teacher Gerard reached the 8th. The mentor promised his student to let him go from the mountains as soon as he reached at least the 4th step. Today was the perfect opportunity to escape, while the trainer went down to the village closest to the mountains. But Riffenhart did not take advantage of it and decided to devote his time to learning magic. The sorcerer cast an air bullet spell and sent it towards the target. The purple ball left his hand and flew straight into the nearest tree. But, alas, the spell left only a couple of scratches on the dark bark. Riefenhart came to the conclusion that with such a meager amount of mana, Teslon's dull brain, not inclined to calculations and magical skills damaged due to forced movement, he would no longer be a mage. Suddenly he felt someone's energy very close. The sorcerer could tell for sure that it did not come from a human. The crunch of branches under massive paws was heard, and an impressively sized orc appeared in front of Riefenhart. Everything would be fine. But the magician didn't like the sword in the orc's hands at all. Riefenhart showed his displeasure with his whole appearance and had already begun to call upon the aura in case a blow was necessary. "Pretend you didn't see me, human, and then I won't touch you," the orc said, stumbling and trying to catch his breath. The mage analyzed the stranger's appearance and thought that he was a very young orc, perhaps one who had escaped from the arena. "Pretend you didn't see me and I won't hurt you," the orc repeated. "Young orc, who is pursuing you?" Riefenhart responded, realizing that his interlocutor was not hostile and was definitely one of those who did not want senseless sacrifices. "How does a man know such a great language?" the orc asked in surprise, flattering Riefenhart. The orc confirmed the magician's suspicions and said that he was being chased. "I want to help, do you believe me?" the man asked the monster. The orc trusted the magician like a brother, because he knew the great language, and the kindness of his soul was not in doubt. But he was very worried that helping him would cost the man his life. Riefenhart noted the nobility of the orc's speech and convinced him of his readiness to help in any case. The sorcerer had already figured out how to hide the stranger and immediately began to cast a spell. He opened a portal, inviting the orc to step inside so that the magic could cover him. "My savior, are you also a magician?" The orc was surprised, baffling the magician himself. "With a body like that?" he added, causing Riefenhart to look him over from head to toe. After this pause, the orc stepped into the portal, once again thanking the sorcerer for his help. The magician barely had time to complete the spell when footsteps were heard behind him. Mercenaries were coming out of the forest, lamenting about some problem that was worth only a couple of silver coins. "Hey you, has a small orc passed by here?" One of the humans, apparently their leader, addressed Riefenhart disrespectfully. The fat-tailed man even offered the magician a gold coin for his help. However, even without gold, Riefenhart had no intention of helping them. The people were convinced that the magician was hiding the fugitive from them, because there were orcish tracks everywhere. "This is my home, actually. I won't let you in just like that." The sorcerer frowned, internally scolding himself for the fact that the basic magic hadn't removed the traces. The leader was beside himself with rage that some kid from a remote village dared to tell him where he could go and where he couldn't. The entire squad continued to shout insults at Riefenhart, but they did not dare attack him. The magician remembered the coach's instructions about showing mercy to the weak, and under no circumstances using your fists where you can take the life of an opponent with one blow. To fight people, you can use their own means, weapons. "At least you won't die from a blow from this," Riefenhart said mockingly, drawing out a training club with a spell. Indestructible Gym focuses on the art of bare-handed combat, but that doesn't mean it doesn't include weapons handling. "Are you pretending to be a great fighter or something?" one of the people yelled. But seeing a slight smile on his opponent's face, he began to back away. Unfortunately, it didn't help him. A few moments later, half of the squad was lying unconscious on the ground. The boy continued to mercilessly hit the sides with the baton, and each time the blow hit the target, the mercenaries cursed but bravely went into a very fair fight. all against one. There was one catch to Reifenhardt's weapon. It was created for training students, not for combat. So there were no defensive moves, only offensive ones. They tried to thrust a sword into the sorcerer's back with all their might. Unfortunately, it simply bent in half and was no longer usable. It seemed unfair to Riefenhardt how strong his body was. He even began to doubt a little whether it was human. But on the other hand, he fought with a weapon that was not intended to kill the enemy. So why worry? Joints will be torn, bones will be broken, but these mercenaries will not die. No matter what happens, you won't die, thought Riefenhardt, half irritated, half relieved. All his opponents were already lying on the ground and begging for mercy, except for the squad leader. "What's your name, freak? Speak," the mercenary growled, causing only disgust in the magician. "It's not fair that you're standing on your feet while your friends are already praying to their ancestors," Riefenhardt said playfully, swinging his arm at the mercenary. The squad leader, frightened, picked up his wounded comrade and wandered away from this boy and his remote village. Riefenhardt was glad that he had managed to warm up, and even allowed himself to think that it was time to have his own students, so that he would have someone to beat up. Coming out of hiding, the orc again thanked his savior. "I will not forget this until the end of my days and will definitely repay your kindness," the wanderer promised. Riefenhardt was surprised that the orc bowed his head to him, since warriors were not supposed to do so. But his new friend surprised him even more by saying that the mage made him look at his life differently by becoming his mentor. "When the time comes, I will surely dedicate my sword to you," said the green warrior. "May I know your name, savior?" "I am Tess," the sorcerer began, but changed his mind. Could it be that he himself began to forget who he really is? "My name is Reifenhardt Waldanteris," he said after a few seconds of hesitation. "I will remember this name," the orc promised his savior. Despite the fact that the green warrior had nowhere to go, because he was an unwelcome guest on human land, he did not lose his optimism, and was sure that it was better to die as a free wanderer than as a slave. Reifenhardt remembered the nameless wasteland that the orcs called the Land of Trials. The magician told his new friend that the orcs of the Blue Bear tribe were hiding there, which meant that he could find shelter among them. The orc, following Reifenhardt's instructions, set off. "What is your name?" the magician managed to shout at the back of the departing warrior. "I am the son of the mole, the heir of the lat's axe." "My name is Tahid," the warrior shouted, and the Demon King's jaw dropped. As the warrior made his way through the fields, paving his way into a new future, the magician felt warmth in his soul. He remembered one of the 4 heavenly kings, the great warrior Tahid, which the young orc had not yet become. Riefenhardt wondered if the real Teslan could have met Tahid in a past life, turning their lives upside down without offering a helping hand. The magician watched his departing friend and was convinced that this was definitely a fateful meeting. For the first time since the time travel, the magician felt such a strong and bright longing for home. He missed an empire built on understanding and tolerance for each other, and he really hoped to meet again with all his friends, whom he had long considered his family. Half a year had passed since the mysterious meeting with Tahid, so the mountains where Riefenhardt and Gerard used to train were covered in snow. The booming, "Bite me, student," could be heard from several kilometers away as the trainer rushed towards the Demon King, summoning so much aura that it looked like a ray of sunlight. "This is too much," cried Riefenhardt, meeting the attack. The mentor hoped that Teslan would have time to get his bearings and set up a defense. The student did not fail, using the Vortex Guard technique. "Your Vortex Guard is beyond praise," Gerard noted happily. "It seems like just yesterday, after another scolding, you were whining about how you were some kind of Reifenhardt and not Teslan," the mentor began. But the sorcerer interrupted him and asked him not to recall the events of 6 years ago. Gerard pointed out to the sorcerer that it had been 10 whole years since he began his training, but he was still very small. "What do you mean, small?" Riefenhardt was indignant. "I'm almost 2 meters tall." "The member of the indestructible gym must exceed 2 meters, the trainer recited, recalling the previous kings of martial arts. "Were you sure you followed the breathing technique I taught you correctly?" he asked Teslan. Riefenhardt replied that build wasn't that important, but he thought to himself that the old man had gone completely crazy, since even with his current height, the sorcerer had a hard time getting through doorways. The trainer, agreeing that the student was not bad and strong even in his rather small frame, asked to start training. Riefenhardt called upon his aura, strength, and endurance. Feeling ready, he lifted off the ground, swirling the air around him into a spiral of energy. The sorcerer prepared to use the Horn of Disaster, but this time the target was a frozen body of water. Having concentrated all of his aura into his fist, the mage exhaled in an attempt to free his mind. One precise, yet so destructive and powerful blow allows Riefenhardt to break through the ice. Already in the water, he realizes that the fourth step has been conquered by him. The frozen pond explodes like an ice geyser. The mentor watches the ice flows soaring into the sky and laughs. "This is simply superb," he exults, sharing his student's victory. "Now you're definitely not going to be easy to beat," the trainer tells Riefenhardt when he surfaces. "It seems the time has come for you to go to the outside world," Gerard says, ignoring Teslan's surprise. "You did a good job, student," the coach smiles. "Now you are free to live as you see fit, as a hero or a villain," he continues. "This is a reward for all your efforts," the mentor concludes. "Mentor, Gerard," says Riefenhardt, not even realizing what he wants to tell him. It's good that the coach doesn't let him finish and tells him about his teacher, who told him to remember the 3 main rules. First, making money is good, but you shouldn't get involved in dishonest things. Even if you're going to be a villain, you have to be a decent villain with style, after all. Second, whenever possible, speak out on behalf of those who have been wronged. But there is no need to defend every weakling on the way, because weakness is not always a consequence of unfair treatment, and the world is full of those who are already weaker than Gerard. And finally, he talked about the most important third rule. Bring the teaching of the unbreakable rocking chair to the masses and make sure that it does not break. Gerard explained to the sorcerer that he would need to find a student to whom he would pass on their great techniques, but he warned that finding a talented student is not easy. It is important not to miss the opportunity if it presents itself. Otherwise, you can spend eternity looking for the next candidate. The mentor gave Riefenhardt 30 silver for the journey and a bag with his clothes. The sorcerer did not expect such a small salary, because he counted on the fact that Gerard had his own estate and untold riches in the kingdom of Vasily. The trainer just laughed at the student, noting that the payment was set by the clan, and he had received less at the time and handed Riefenhardt the card. The map had a marker indicating a surprise in the Settlered Mountains, which the mentor had advised me to definitely visit. Wrapping himself in warmer clothes, Riefenhardt took one last look around at the place he was about to leave. Is he really going to leave these mountains? Finally, after 6 long years, he is free. Before Riefenhardt could rejoice at his release, a powerful beam of energy appeared in the distance, exploding the tops of the mountains. This spectacle seriously frightened the now young sorcerer. The performance that the mentor arranged literally said, "Go, my student. Do not be sad about parting. Carry steel determination without hesitation. After all, you are the heir to the greatest techniques on this earth." The trainer's voice reached Riefenhardt. The magician, without thinking twice, rushed on foot towards civilization. Meanwhile, in a cozy house in the village, the following events took place. The establishment's employee tried to dissuade the village elder from talking to the knights, but the knight himself turned to the elder. "What's the matter? I ask you to pay for the food provided to you and your knights," the old man said sternly. The knight threw a gold coin at him, thinking about how selfish the peasant people were. The village chief stared in surprise at the gold in his hands. "I'm sorry, sir, but that's not enough," the old man mumbled. The knight, in a rage, began to accuse the village elder of impudence and attempting to deceive the aristocrats. Without a shadow of regret, he hit the old man in the face. Looking askance at his offender, the elder thought that it was the knights who had become insolent, having occupied their houses, gobbled up their food supplies, and were trying to pay for all this with one damn gold coin. "What is the matter, Sir Edward?" asked a black-haired young man who had come down from the second floor. The knight asked Mr. Stefan not to bother his head with this. "That's why you can't be nice to peasants," the young gentleman said with a grin. "They forget their place. Let's move forward in time and space to a luxurious palace where 2 people are lying on a bed in a bedroom." Ceres runs her finger along Riefenhardt's collarbone and laughs at the boy's question about why she loves his frail body so much. "Your features are so sharp and chiseled like a fine blade," the elf whispers, smiling. These memories cause Riefenhardt and Teslan's body to hate his golem-like outer shell. The only plus to his current position is that he has become much taller. The mage thought that Ceres was now about 70 years old, which in human years was only 17. Riefenhardt stopped in Krom, a town south of the kingdom of Vasily. In a year, the elf will be sold at the Chetan slave auction. Maybe he should smash this auction to hell. On the other hand, acting recklessly will make it difficult to restore magical powers. It is better to solve the problem with money. The prices for elves are astronomical. Riefenhardt is literally a beggar, but he has a powerful body, techniques, and knowledge of the future, so he will somehow figure it out. The magician knew that on the way to Chetan there were only ancient runes, but the black-haired young gentleman did not know. and therefore resorted to the help of the sorcerer Todd in his search. The archaeology-focused mage of the Delphia Tower was an excellent search engine. When the magician finished his rituals, Mr. Stefan asked him again if they were on the right path. Todd convinced him that these were indeed the mountains where the burial place of the famous swordsman, Sir Claude von Leotars Altheon, was located. Meanwhile, Riffenhart was already on his way, glad that thanks to his training he didn't have to worry about things like colds and flu. With the help of a special magical technique of artificial return, the sorcerer was able to regain his memories of the ancient ruins at the foot of the Khatan Mountains, which the magician from the Delphia Tower, Todd, told him about. In his past life, Riffenhart had already been there and even found real treasures that Todd's comrades had missed. He made good money selling the jewelry, earning about 2,000 gold pieces. The mage's thoughts flew ahead of his feet, so he did not immediately understand that it was time to stop. Riffenhart looked down on the village of cattle and saw that nothing had changed since his last visit. While the Demon King was indulging in nostalgia, the local villagers were deciding who would have to go to the Valley of Death with the Knight's squad. The nobles demanded a guide, but the peasants could not refuse because the last person who stood up for them, the elder, was not in the best condition now. There were heated arguments, no one wanted to volunteer, but there was also no desire to expose their comrades to danger. Unexpectedly, Ted took the initiative and offered his candidacy as the most suitable, because he knows the mountains very well. The volunteer's wife and daughter swarmed around him, begging him not to go with the knights into the Valley of Death. The crowd very quickly saw his candidacy as the only correct one, and encouraged him with phrases like, "You can do it. Everyone should do what they can do. Good luck, Ted." "If you don't want to, I can go," they shouted from outside the window, frightening everyone present. Ted, without a moment's hesitation, pulled the bowstring towards the stranger, asking who the hell he was. After talking with Riffenhart and being convinced of his good intentions, the peasant still could not believe that he was voluntarily volunteering to go to the Valley of Death. "They don't come back from there, are you sure, son?" one of the locals asked, causing the magician to smile and want to get on the road as soon as possible. Death Valley is nothing more than a dungeon, a relic of the past. 50 years ago, there was a knight from the Altean family named Claude. He awakened his aura at the age of 45, went through many adventures, and legends about him circulated throughout the kingdom of Vasili longer than he lived. Fame often breeds arrogance, so Claude went into the Valley of Death with only one squire and died, leaving his famous demonic sword, Altean, underground. The sword was a symbol of the family and was passed down from generation to generation, so the heirs were obsessed with the idea of finding the lost relic even after 50 years. And now, Riefenhart has joined the squad of the young master Stefan von Rapanto Altean in search of the lost inheritance. The magician noticed that Stefan was often carried away by conversations with the elf accompanying him. Humans usually need elves for entertainment, so the Demon King concluded that the giggling girl with long ears was a slave. Riefenhart was also bothered by the fact that there was only one saint in the squad, and he looked very young and inexperienced. If he is a boy at all, he looks an awful lot like a girl with his long red hair. The magician decided that he would need to talk to Todd, since he was at least a familiar face. But Todd didn't leave the saint's side for a minute, entertaining him and, it seemed, flirting. Could it be that the magician he had known for a long time preferred boys? "This just can't be. Todd is a great guy," Riefenhart internally lamented when the knight spoke to him. The warrior noted that the sorcerer was not afraid to choose the difficult path when the peasants in the village did not want to move in any direction. The magician understood the fears of ordinary people before the unknown, and almost choked when his interlocutor asked, "What's so scary when you are accompanied by brave knights? It seems that there really isn't a knight in the world who doesn't spread his tail like a peacock." Suddenly, a noise came from the side, which distracted Riefenhart's interlocutor, and later the magician himself saw how, throwing up columns of air, something was flying up from the forest into the sky. At first, it seemed as if the treetops had broken off and decided that they were birds. But when the unidentified object stopped spinning, they revealed sharp fangs and glowing eyes. A whole flock of half-birds, half-humans quickly attacked the heroes. Retreating is not a habit of the brave knights, so they prepared their weapons for battle. The Harpies looked truly terrifying. There was nothing but rage in their eyes, and their powerful wings could easily bury one or two warriors under them. Young Master Stefan did not lose his head and sent his knights into the attack. Todd had already cast a fire chain spell and sent it into the crowd of Harpies like an arrow from a bow. The cries of half-birds engulfed in fire will haunt even the most cruel magician in his nightmares. However, Todd did not abandon the spell halfway and finished it, thus damaging most of the pack. At this time, the knights were overcome by a wave of energy, charging them for victory. "Oh, Lord Philances, send them strength and courage," the detachment saint shouted with all his might. Riffenhart watched the fight from the sidelines and was surprised at how well his new acquaintances were doing, especially Stefan. From a magician's point of view, of course. From a martial artist's perspective, they are all pretty pathetic. The magician noticed that one of the harpies that had attacked the knightly detachment had set its sights on new victims. With her mouth open, growling and lightning flashing from her eyes, she swiftly fell from the sky onto the passing orcs. The monsters closed their eyes, not wanting to see their comrades suffer. And then, out of nowhere, a huge fist flew straight into the face of the predatory half-bird. The harpy's body parts and feathers flew through the air, mixing with each other. When the orcs opened their eyes, they saw before them Teslan, the then unknown king of martial arts. If Riffenhart remembered Todd's adventures correctly, then the guide Ted died right on this spot in the past. Now the magician, or rather the guide, has survived, and history must forge a new path for itself. The expedition captain Stefan had a glare in his eyes no less than that of the Harpies. His sword lived a separate life on the battlefield, punishing his opponents. The half-birds did not spare the warriors if they managed to reach them with their giant claws. Young Master Stefan paid no attention to the cries for rescue from his own squad. It can't be said that he is a bad person, but he doesn't really care about his subordinates. And because of him, the guide Ted died in the past. The red-haired saint interrupted Riffenhart's thoughts with an order to hide behind the trees. Before the magician could even move, the half-bird's sharp knife-like feathers flew at him. The Demon King was once again surprised by his body's endurance capabilities, as he didn't even feel ticklish from this attack. But one feather hit him straight in the untrained eye. He punched away a bird falling from the sky during an attack with one fist, and with his other hand he brushed away the tears that he thought he had cried to the last drop during training. The squad leader, Stefan, as he should have, was only concerned about whether the mages and the saints survived, and he didn't give a damn about Riefenhart, and especially about the monsters that the mage was trying to save. "The Knights of Alchion are strong," the young master called out to his soldiers with a battle cry. "May the sweetness of victory come to your hearts. Rest." He dismissed the squad to gather strength. Riffenhart took the chance to talk to Todd. "If I remember correctly, you are from the Magic Tower Delphia?" the Demon King asked, after thanking the magician for saving his life, although it was blatant flattery. "Do you know Riefenhart, my friend?" The sorcerer tried to find out about himself. Todd was surprised that a talented child had such great friends. "He's so sweet and cute," the Delphic magician muttered under his breath. Riefenhart asked again if everything was okay with the young magician, if anything strange had happened to him, and he was satisfied with Todd's answer that Riffenhart was immersed in his studies and spent his days cramming. "His little sharp nose, as always, is on point," the Delphic magician said clearly. "And the eyes are like jewels and the skin is so soft, so soft." He couldn't stop. Riffenhart wanted to beat up the sorcerer who was obsessed with the young body, but he decided not to draw attention to himself, especially since Todd still hadn't said anything intelligible. A red-haired saint joined their company and asked if Riffenhart needed help. The magician thanked the priest for his concerns and sent him to heal the orcs. The knights of the squad began to complain that the saint should not waste his precious time helping monsters. Riffenhart noted that despite the squad's outrage, the saint continued to heal the orcs, but his attitude towards them was more like love for animals than anything human. "Hey, guide!" the captain exclaimed. "Show us the way, and quickly!" "Go straight ahead, then turn right," said the magician. "There's a body of water straight ahead. You'll have to slow down a bit." And they set off. Several hours later, somewhere in the forest, the tired sighs of knights and the rumble of a disorderly detachment could be heard. First the basilisk, then the dark wolf, and more than 20 ogres. One of the warriors recounted their adventures over the past hours. Riffenhart chuckled, because he had led them through this area infested with creatures on purpose. The knights are arrogant, the priests are too serious, and the magicians are downright crazy, the sorcerer thought to himself, justifying himself by saying that he was leading them along the shortest path. "Who would have known that there were so many monsters here in the place where Sir Claude died?" Stefan said, out of breath from fatigue. The next second he completely forgot how to breathe. Such an incredible sight opened up before him. The young gentleman looked at the entrance to the underworld. "Is this it?" the captain asked the guide and the knights uncertainly. "These are ancient coat ruins," one of the warriors said enthusiastically. After some time, they were already walking through the Valley of Death to the entrance to the ancient ruins. None of the travelers dared to be the first to step through the open gates of the massive structure. Todd pointed to the entrance to one of the best knights and a young gentleman. "Get ready, comrades," roared the heir of the Alchion family. Riffenhart wished to remain outside, after which Stefan wanted to send him home. But having made sure that the guide would not return home alone, he promised to accompany him on the return journey. The magician could barely restrain himself from smashing the young captain's head with his fist when he found out that no one was going to see him home in the first place. Stefan gave a passionate speech about his ancestors' wishes and set the party on a quest to find the demonic sword. Riffenhart waved his hand with pleasure at the brave warriors, and so, after a couple of minutes, he was left at the gate completely alone. "Okay, well now it's time to take care of my own business," the magician said to himself. Right now, this place, the ancient ruins of the Coat, is completely filled with monsters and spirits, but originally in the Silver Age, it was a strategic point and was used as a normal military facility. Riffenhart hadn't been to this place for a long time. The last time they came here was with Cirrus. The elf found a secret passage after hearing the whispers of the sylphs. Ceres was Riffenhart's personal goddess, whom he was willing to worship. Remembering what they had done with the brave elf in the middle of the danger zone, the magician blushed as if he were wearing paint. Riffenhart remembered that the key to entering the secret passage was the balance of the water and earth seals in reverse order. But despite the secret knowledge, it was difficult to open the entrance due to the lack of mana and not the sharpest mind in the current body. However, when he opened his eyes, Riffenhart saw the walls parting, forming a passage. He decided to take off his jacket and leave it at the entrance. After all, it cost 10 silver coins. "Well, the time has come to test the physical capabilities of this body," the magician said to himself, warming up. From the depths of the ruins came terrible screams. Riffenhart was confused because they were coming from a different direction than where his companions had gone. He stopped to think about the secret passage connecting the third floor with the basement. "If I open it, it won't be a very nice situation," the magician thought fearfully. And then I immediately remembered that this was, after all, a military structure. Activating any device with mana will trigger traps designed to scare away intruders. Last time, it was just the two of them with Ceres, so they weren't too worried about other places, but right now, there's an Altian squad out there somewhere. They must have fallen into a trap and fallen somewhere into the basement area, the magician thought. Meanwhile, somewhere in the depths of the ruins of the Coat, a sharp scythe cut off the head of the valiant Sir Thomas. The captain of the detachment uttered the name of his brave soldier for the last time and turned his gaze into the abyss that opened before him. "What the?" Stefan only managed to mutter before he noticed a glint in the darkness. The scythe, with drops of blood from a recent murder, stubbornly stuck out of the wall. Suddenly, a red ember flared up in the darkness, illuminating a giant skull. "We cannot defeat this monster." The young gentleman was frightened when his eyes got used to the darkness, and he saw the real size of the enemy. It turned out that the scythe was not sticking out of the wall. It was just a piece of the terrifying monster's weapon. Is it even possible for a human to defeat such a terrible demon? The captain asked himself, trying to make out the devil's head somewhere high above. "Oh, great Philances! Shine your healing light on this wounded soul," the red-haired healer muttered to himself as he helped his wounded comrades. The priest gladly accepted the knight's thanks, but he would be lying if he said he would have survived in this place without them. So his spells were partly an act of selfishness. The entire team was almost not killed by the collapse of the floor, so the red-haired saint hastened to thank Todd for the magical protection. "We may have escaped the damage from the fall, but what dangers await us further is unknown," warned the sorcerer from Delphia. The entire squad froze on the threshold of the unknown. A blow came from the darkness, instantly sending the first row of knights to rest on the stone floor. "Monster!" cried the terrified soldiers, confronted for the first time with a threat of such magnitude. From the gate stepped two giants, armed to the teeth with red skin, 4 hands in each of which was a weapon, huge horns and eyes that glowed like 2 embers smoldering in a dark abyss. The soldiers only had one look at the giants to start running, so they didn't notice the troop of dead men walking behind their leaders. Only the priest did not move from his place. With his hands folded in prayer, he called upon the great Philanins. A pink haze of spells surrounded the mighty idol above the red-haired boy's head. "Great Philanins, grant your slaves unshakable courage," the saint asked. "The ever-boasting knights of Altian don't have enough of him at all. A waste of muscle," he thought. The healer also asked for an unbridled wave of courage. Todd was surprised by the amount of holy power that his friend poured into the knights. The knights literally became berserkers. "Knights of Altian, let us show these inferior creatures our strength," one of the outstanding warriors commanded, and led his squad into the attack. Demons and humans clashed in a fierce battle. The courage with which the knights were instilled allowed them to look their enemy in a less than pleasant face. At this time, Todd was casting his spell, calling upon the earth to reach out and reveal what she had given birth to. His iron steel spell freed his opponent's hands from their weapons. One of the giants tried to get his sword back, but a clever elf appeared in his way. Lelsia looked incredibly epic, wielding 2 swords at once. She attacked the largest of the giants several times, jumping at great heights where other knights were afraid to go. Putting all her fury into the blow, the elf attacked the red giant's hand, trying to cut it off. However, the demon only crushed Lelsia's sword and threw her from the height, allowing the sword fragments to fall as quickly as the girl. After the fall, the elf could not find the strength to even get back on her feet. "Have I been helpful, master?" she asked Stefan when he finally joined his knights. "Good job, Lelsia," the captain roared, rushing into battle. The demons did not want to retreat, destroying everything in their path. The young master also did not have the word surrender in his vocabulary, just like the martial arts king he did not know. The heir of Altion crushed the dead with his sword without mercy. Stefan despised the dead and did not tolerate cowardice among his soldiers. "Gather at once. Here Sir Claude himself has fallen, the greatest knight of the past." The captain tried to inspire the squad. A huge pillar of fire pierced the ceiling, turning the battle hall into a bathhouse for a while. It was so hot. Stone slabs fell to the floor, burying brave warriors underneath them. When the knights' eyes became accustomed to the bright light and smoke from the fire, they saw that in the middle of the room stood a monster, larger than the 2 red giants. Composed entirely of lava, with huge horns and a row of teeth capable of biting several fighters at once, the monster looked straight into the heroes' souls. He let out a deep roar and charged. With one blow of its paw, the monster knocked down 6 soldiers at once. Without hesitation, the captain tried to inspire the squad. "You yourself decided to go to the end, so do not disgrace the title of the Knights of Altion." The monster released a blast of fire, baking alive any soldiers who got too close to it. Only echoes of his blow reached the captain, but even from them he felt as if he were in hell. "I can't die like this," the young gentleman repeated to himself through clenched teeth. "I don't want to lose so shamefully," he thought, grabbing the nearest sword. The last descendant of the great Altion family ran for a powerful blow. Believing in his own steadfastness and putting all his fury into the attack, he rushed towards the monster. The technique of a swift strike never failed the young master. And then, having pierced the monster's chest, filled with lava with his sword, he was confident of the success of his maneuver. But a powerful paw hit him in the face. The heir of Altion rose into the air like a feather. And then, hard as an anvil, he fell to the floor of the stone hall. The darkness in the young gentleman's head thickened with every breath, and after a couple of seconds he surrendered to her embrace. Filling the room with a pink haze, the idol appeared in the air again, sitting on something like a rattle. "Great Philanense, crush the wicked creatures with your ray of light," the saint prayed. The holy rattle struck the monster in the back. The monster roared and instantly realized who had struck the blow. Tears mixed with sweat on the healer's face, and there was impenetrable horror in his eyes. The fire giant turned around and headed towards the red-haired boy. The saint froze, not knowing what else he could do, and resigned to his imminent death. He closed his eyes, clenched his teeth, and mentally recited his last prayer. Then something flew over the healer's head like a bullet. The saint opened his eyes and could have sworn that someone had punched the monster in the face. The red-haired boy was finally able to see his savior. It turned out to be a young man who led them into the Valley of Death. The aura flowed in rings around the red-haired warrior, so at first the healer did not notice that the room had become cooler. But when the young man stopped spreading energy around himself, everyone turned their attention to the monster. More precisely, what was left of it after the conductor's attack. "No wonder I almost died from one blow from Teslon," thought Reifenhardt. The magician glanced around and frowned. So many brave knights fell within these walls, including the cheerful elf. And it seems that the heir of Altion did not survive the battle either. Riffenhardt had just suggested moving the fallen to safety when more undead began to descend the stairs. Todd and the healer froze in place as they watched the guide deal with the dead with barely a touch. The squad of monsters scattered across the hall faster than ale in a tavern. Reifenhardt was simply trying to carry the elf away from the battlefield and politely asked the undead not to stand in his way. Captain Altion could barely open his eyes. His whole body ached, especially his head. "Are you awake?" one of the knights asked him as the young gentleman began to look around in shock. Stefan wondered what had happened while he was unconscious. After hearing the whole story, the heir of Altion was indignant. "Is he a martial artist?" he shouted, pointing his finger at Riffenhardt. "I could not recognize such a distinguished warrior. May I know your name?" the young gentleman asked Riffenhardt. The mage knew Todd would be suspicious if he introduced himself by his real name, so he chose the shortened form, Reifen. Stefan tried to find out more about Ryfin, but he didn't even know where he came from. Gritting his teeth, the heir of Altian thought that the guide turned out to be a commoner without any support, not even an aristocrat on a free voyage. "It seems you've only just finished the job we started, but thank you anyway." Stefan praised the Demon King. Riffenhardt, grinning, pointed out to the young gentleman that his brain was clearly not working well, and that their squad of fighters was of practically no use. "How dare you? Where is your respect for the Altian family?" the black-haired boy roared. A knight from the inner circle reassured the young gentleman, reminding him that commoners had no manners. Stefan tried again to find out where Ryfin learned martial arts from, but he just waved it off, saying that he learned a little bit of everything and everywhere. The young gentleman doubted the guide's words because, grasping at chaotic knowledge, one cannot achieve such skills. The close knight noticed that Ryfin's speech was very simple and natural. Perhaps he did not even realize how arrogant his words sounded. Those guys could definitely use some help. The guide pointed to the wounded Altian fighters. The knight continued to talk about how Ryfin treated those around him, as if the difference in age and status did not bother him at all. Perhaps he was a member of a royal family from foreign lands. After all, it is only in royal nature to lecture everyone around you as if they were younger than you. The knight turned away from the guide and went to help his comrades when a saint approached Ryfin and asked how tall he was. "Well, about 192 centimeters, the Demon King answered, but was immediately stumped by the question about weight. The red-haired youth did not calm down and continued to ask the guide about his training methods, the secrets of such a body, and all sorts of nonsense. Healer Silenphil Marsus lost his parents early and grew up in an orphanage, and was often reproached for his cute face and frail body. Deep down, Silen wanted to have a healthy body and a low voice, which is probably why he joined the monks who torture their bodies to prove their piety. But, unfortunately, he never grew up, never matured. His hair grew too fast, and instead of physical strength, he was only able to grow divine strength. That's why the priest is so jealous of muscular guys. "I'll go look for a way out," Ryfin said, trying to escape Silen's devouring gaze, but the priest ran after him. The magician persuaded the healer to stay with the wounded, in case someone needed help, and the saint left. Stefan was chatting with Lelsia, who had already received a dose of divine healing, but he got distracted and volunteered to go with Ryfin. "You don't mind, do you?" the young gentleman asked the conductor. "As you wish," the red-haired warrior replied, and continued walking. As they walked through the tangled corridors of the ruins of the coat, the captain reasoned that he was offended that some village boy helped him, and did not regard helping knights as an act of honor. Stefan even dreamed that demons would appear from around the corner, which he would quickly kill, and Ryfin would fall at his feet and worship his power. Before the young gentleman could imagine the demons in vivid colors, he received a blow to the head. "Almost there," Ryfin said, looking at the captain's falling body. "Take a little nap," he added with a grin. Even before he turned around, the magician sensed something was wrong. A squad of the dead rushed towards the red-haired warrior from the dark corridors. Ryfin had no trouble dealing with the monsters. Once the monsters were dealt with, it was time to look at the treasures. Riffenhardt looked around the upside-down treasure trove. He knew approximately where the 50 gold coins from the Silver Age should be, and immediately began to look for them. His eye fell on a bottomless bag that could hold 10 times more items than it appeared to hold, and its weight was also reduced tenfold. The magician also grabbed a heavenly brazier, a blade of return, and a magical sapphire. Stefan had already begun to come to his senses when Ryfin returned. "They hit you right in the back of the head and you passed out right away," the guide said joyfully. "Thank you for helping," the captain said through clenched teeth. "No need to thank me," the magician answered nobly, keeping quiet about the fact that he had knocked Stefan out. And not just once, because while Riffenhardt was digging up the artifacts, he had to add a couple more blows to the first one on the captain's poor head. However, our hero had no regrets about this. While Stefan was wondering how he could have missed the enemy, Ryfin was happy with his bag being filled to the brim, and was planning his next return for the remaining treasures. The guide and the captain returned to their detachment without incident. Silen continued to bombard Ryfin with questions, and he seemed to have come up with the idea that the red-haired warrior was a prince. The healer noted that despite his extraordinary fighting abilities, the prince's first and foremost trait was his habit of speaking condescendingly. And while in Stefan's case this was understandable, he was still very young. It was extremely rude to treat one of the best knights, Sir Edward, condescendingly, since he was, after all, much older than Ryfin. "I just rarely met people on my way, so I forgot my manners," the magician justified himself, and noted to himself that he must not forget that his current body was only 22 years old. The squad walked along the corridors that Ryfin had previously examined, so there was nothing to worry about. Stefan opened the gate that had appeared in the warrior's path, and then everyone standing behind the heir saw something that the magician had not noticed during his walk around. It seemed they had entered the wrong door, because in the middle of the hall there was a huge head of a demon, Greblista. Breaking through the ceiling, the monster straightened its shoulders and tried to stand up to its full height. In the demon's hands, the very sword of Sir Claude that Stefan had come here for lay menacingly. "Who would have thought that this place had such a guard?" muttered the heir of Altion. Reifenhart noted with displeasure that he did not remember Greblist appearing within these walls, which meant that by the time he came to the ruins with Cirrus, the demon was already dead. "Let's go back. We can't handle this monster with our own forces," he suggested to the captain. But it was too late. One of the knights pointed out to Stefan the treasure he was looking for in the hands of the monster. It was impossible to confuse the demonic sword Alchin with another artifact. "You're not going to fight this monster, are you?" Sir Edward asked, obviously stupid. Despite the offer to retreat and develop a plan, already knowing the enemy, the captain prepared for the attack, because he could not forgive the desecration of the sword of his ancestors. "I wouldn't back down even if the sword was in the hands of the Grim Reaper," Stefan shouted. "To arms, my brothers!" roared the captain, leading his soldiers to certain death. What a moron, Rifen thought, knowing he would have to take on most of the battle himself. Within the spatial rift in the ruins of the Silver Age, there is a system of automatic correction of the system's deficiencies. That is, when the system fails, protection is triggered that absorbs monsters. In other words, the entities guarding the dungeons exist peacefully until the system kidnaps them to use as guardians. In front of the squad stood the same demon that had defeated Claude, who had mastered the aura. The captain made fun of the frightened army, hinting that the demon was chained and there was no need to fear him. Rifen rightly noted that the squad had no chance against the monster. Sir Edward took offense at Rifen's words, pointing out that he was a country boy who did not know the honor of a knight and the things worth dying for. Reifenhart looked at the squad in shock as they walked towards certain death. They couldn't defeat the lower-level demons. What hope could these madmen have? "May the blessing of the goddess be with you," Sillin implored the knights. The emboldened warriors went on a direct attack against the monster. The demon, even in a restrained state, was able to knock out half of the attackers with one blow. Watching the knights scatter across the hall, Rifen noted that he had said that this plan wouldn't work. "Another one is flying," he said without a trace of sympathy. "How can there be compassion if people actually enjoy getting the shit kicked out of them? Don't lose heart. We are the Knights of Altion. Even this demon fears us." The captain's instructions were heard. Rifen was once again convinced of how stupid the young master was, that no matter what you tell him, he won't listen. And you can't rely on Sir Edward, he's only helping this impudent young man in his attempts to die. The captain, of course, shows off. Flutters like a butterfly, stings like a bee. But he barely scratched the monster. Sillin once again summoned the holy rattle. "O Philinense, turn your sacred staff upon this evil being," he prayed. A pink shroud enveloped the monster and the space around it. The idol that the priest had summoned opened its mouth in a non-existent cry. Sillin insisted that Philinense release his sacred staff. Gracefully waving his hand, the healer directed energy towards the monster. For a second, Riffenhart thought it might work, as the room was filled with pink light and sacred rattles were flying toward Greblist. Unfortunately, the pink light dissolved. The demon was still there, but the agile Lelzia was already rushing towards him with her trusty sword. She jumped on the monster's head and delivered several precise blows. She then pushed off his horns and flew down, simultaneously striking at his upper body. At this time, Stefan attacked the lower part of the monster's body. Riffenhart thought that Lelzia was very talented. Perhaps she would be cooler than Sir Edward. Did I really underestimate them? The magician was surprised when he saw his colleague cast a spell. "Cold of the northern winds, whirl in my hands." Todd made mysterious movements with his hands, causing a snowstorm. Riffenhart looked around at what was left of the ruined ceiling. And just at that moment, the color of the panels switched from blue to bright orange. The chains holding the monster began to gradually heat up. The current defense system is overloaded. The second phase has been activated, freeing the monster from its shackles. "Damn it!" Rifen cursed, frightened by this state of affairs. The rower took off from the ground in a jump and landed back on it, crushing a couple of soldiers along the way to the point of, "We'll hardly be able to put anything in the coffin." Greblist looked like a real Satan, with his huge horns and a star carved into his forehead. "Die, Greblist!" Stefan shouted, raising his sword over the monster's head. However, the monster made its move faster, and with one blow sent the captain into the nearest wall. Blood gushed from the nose and mouth of the heir of Altion. Sir Edward, seeing how hard the monster had thrown his master, immediately rushed to help. But when he ran up to the wall, Stefan was already almost on his feet and was getting ready to fight again. Lelsia drew her sword and ran to attack, the young captain joining his battle friend. The elf, in her usual manner, jumped around the monster, delivering pinpoint blows. Her movements were reminiscent of a wild cat, just as graceful and elegant. The rower was already becoming irritated by her constantly flickering face nearby. Lelsia did not hide her disgust towards the monster and swung for another blow. At that moment, the monster opened its mouth, from which a wave of fire burst forth. The wave of fire turns into a waterfall, and now fills the entire hall. The hall becomes unbearably hot again, and the already few soldiers of Altian's detachment perish in a fiery storm. It feels like there is no escape from fiery punishment. The hot river is ready to reach Silan before he can even put up any defensive spells. Once again today, a priest is ready to say goodbye to life. And then, out of nowhere, the red-haired prince, Mr. Riffin, blocks him. He creates a shield from his aura which allows them to survive. "Sorry, I slowed down a bit and didn't react in time," Riefenhardt apologized. The rower and the mage looked at each other, realizing that their battle was bound to happen, no matter what. "I can handle this, right?" Riefenhardt asked himself. He wondered what the limit of his current strength was, and whether martial arts could help in the fight against a demon at all. If he were a magician, he wouldn't take risks if the chances of winning were small. But now he's a warrior. Riefenhardt felt goosebumps at the sight of a strong opponent, a feeling he had never experienced in his past life. The magician summoned 2 energy fists and was able to inflict significant damage on the enemy at a distance. Gerard would have been proud of his student's successful attack, because the mentor often repeated, "If in doubt, just strike first." Grelbist swung his sword back to strike, and it missed Riefenhardt's head by a centimeter, grazing his collarbone. The magician was genuinely surprised that the demonic sword was able to slightly scratch him, because he had long ago developed immunity to ordinary human swords. The demon cut through the air several times in a leap, trying to kick Riefenhardt with its hoof. One of the attempts was successful when the magician's hand was hit. Blood spurted from the impact site, and Riefenhardt's eyes widened in confusion. The monster, noticing the enemy's hesitation, took an even greater run and struck with its hoof again. Riefenhardt was thrown head over heels into the wall on the opposite side of the room. He would have been lying if he had heard clearly what the excited Saint Silenus was shouting, because at that moment he only heard his head breaking through the bricks. But when the magician was able to get out from under the rubble, he shouted to the healer just in case that he was okay, and there was no need to worry about him. Silen was pleasantly surprised to see the aura power blazing around Riefenhardt, which earlier in the fight with the lava monster had easily been mistaken for the light from the surrounding fire. The Demon King was upset that he had not held back the blow, because then he would have had a chance to counterattack, and he was too used to dodging his mentor's beatings. But when Grelbist roared in the highest language, Riefenhardt muttered only, "I don't understand a damn thing, but forward," and rushed to meet the monster. The opponents' auras collided and dealt powerful blows to each other. The squad captain's face twisted as he too realized that the village guide was using aura-based combat techniques. How can it be that an aristocrat cannot control the aura, but some unknown commoner managed to awaken it? Stefan wondered. Riefenhardt looked majestic, and didn't even notice it, since the battle completely absorbed his attention. And the heir of Altian was close to hysterics, asking fate how it had allowed such injustice. As if sensing how close Stefan was to the brink of his sanity, the monster roared with all its might and rushed at the warrior with another blow. There was genuine fear in the captain's eyes and a question. Where did the one who uses aura come from, as if he fights with it every day? He no longer saw Riffen as a man, a guide, or a village boy. From now on, in Stefan's eyes, the battle was between 2 monsters. The squad captain's internal monologues did not distract either Riefenhardt or the monster from the fight. Grelbist's demonic sword once again flew past the red-haired warrior, just a few centimeters away. The demon didn't know that for the magician, their fight was equal to a regular, high-level training session. Riefenhardt easily read the monster's attacks and was able to quickly develop counter-tactics. The Demon King's blows hit the enemy's most vulnerable spots, but unlike ordinary people who could be killed by such techniques, the demon only shook himself off and continued the fight. The Guardians of the Ruins do not fall even after serious injuries. The ruins pump mana into them, healing them endlessly. Therefore, any blow from Riefenhardt, as long as the magic of the ruins is alive, is only a slight discomfort for the monster. Almost immediately after realizing this fact, the magician understood what benefit he could get from this fight. I guess I could practice the grabbing technique since it wouldn't hurt either of them, Riefen thought, wrapping himself around his opponent's arm. And you can also hone your fighting technique in the air, the magician rejoiced, lifting himself off the ground and aiming his boot straight at the monster's face. Well, and of course, where would we be without practicing our punches? The magician rejoiced internally, working his fists. The monster was definitely the best punching bag in the world for him. The squad of surviving soldiers, the captain, the mage, and the healer, watched the battle without stopping. "I've gotten carried away," thought Riffenhart, noticing the observers. While the monster tried to crush him with its mighty hooves, the magician thought out his next strategy. If he uses the Horn of Disaster, the monster will be defeated, but he will bury himself and his entire squad alive under the rubble of the destroyed ruins. "Rifen, use the sword!" the Delphic Tower mage shouted. "You can crush him by covering the sword with the priest's aura and blessing." The Demon King's expression involuntarily twisted. He knew about this information even without Todd's instructions, but preferring not to start a quarrel, he told the truth that he did not know how to cover a sword with aura. "I can only envelop the body with aura," he prompted his stunned colleague. "This is the teaching of our fighting clan." "Rifen," the priest shouted, attracting the warrior's attention. "What else do you want from me?" The Demon King got angry, barely holding his opponent's hand to prevent him from plunging the demonic sword into his heart. "Your body has high resilience, right?" Sillin clarified. "Durability?" Rifen said, confused. "Well, yes, it's pretty strong." "Excellent! I'll cast a binding now!" The priest rejoiced and immediately began casting the spell. "Philinensi, send a blessing upon your trusty sword," Sillin prayed as he pumped the power of the gods into the Demon King. Rifen broke into his signature smile and charged forward, feeling like he was 1,000 times better than his punching bag this time. Grabbing the demon by the arms, the magician lifted him off the ground and threw him into the opposite wall of the hall. Was this revenge for Riffenhart's previous flight? Quite possibly. A pink haze enveloped the warrior, and he felt the blessing of the gods on his skin. But one significant point confused him. Did he want to kill me? The magician was filled with rage. "This is a divine strike spell. It is used on objects, not on the human body." "It worked!" Sillin exclaimed, as Rifen tried to come to terms with the idea of being used. "Now beat this battered demon to death," the priest commanded in his sweetest voice. In principle, Riffenhart agreed with him. He himself was already impatient to finish this fight. The boot slammed into the monster's face with furious force. The divine kick technique has never failed a warrior, as well as the divine knee strike technique he used afterwards. After stopping for a minute, Riffenhart took a running start for the main attack. He concentrated all his strength and mana into his fist, aiming at the only correct point. "Divine fist technique," he declared, breaking the chains on the ceiling that the monster seemed to be getting its mana from. Turning into one solid clot of aura, Riffenhart shot through the monster like a comet. Having broken the floor of the hall, he remembered training with his mentor on the lake, where, breaking through ice flows, he went to the bottom to the 4th level of his strength. Grelbist fell apart before his fallen body even reached the ground. The magician assumed a completely natural heroic pose, allowing the spectators to admire his triumph. To be honest, he even slightly idolized himself at that moment. But when Rifen saw how the priest was looking at him, he even became a little embarrassed. The runes on the ceiling of the ruins, accumulating 1,000-year-old magic, made an ominous sound, and then they began to fall down as if it were a meteor shower. "Hurry up! Remove your spell," Rifen asked the healer, seeing that the monster's body had also begun to crumble into dust. Captain Stefan could barely stand on his feet, but he had already begun to sort things out with the warrior. "And you hide your identity well," the heir of Altion said angrily. "Are we that insignificant to you? I admit you are strong, but I will not forgive you for trampling my knightly honor," Stefan continued, confident that the warrior was having fun watching from the sidelines how desperately people fought for their lives. "Fun? Not at all," Riefenhart replied, because in reality he wasn't having fun. He just didn't give a damn about any of them. The warrior turned around and was about to head for the exit when he saw a glint in the broken floor. "How dare you turn your back on me?" Stefan shouted, aiming his sword straight at Rifen's neck. The mage bent down to pick up the demonic sword. The captain, not meeting any resistance with his sword, stumbled. Riffenhart seemed very surprised when he stood up and saw the heir of Altheon tumbling across the ruined floor. If Riffenhart had the opportunity, he would have given him a little push. "You creature, you even dodged on purpose!" Stefan screamed hysterically. "I'm not making fun of you," said the magician, handing the captain the demonic sword. "Take it. That's what you came here for." And while Sir Edward was discussing the lack of any greed in Rifen, who was so truly strong as to so carelessly hand over a precious speech, Stefan burned the sword with his gaze and muttered, "Damn it, what kind of greed are we talking about?" The sorcerer laughed mentally at the knight's speech. "This is second-rate compared to the weapons I usually use, and I used to get swords like these in packs and give them to everyone around me." The heir of Altian could not stop staring at the desired sword. "Let's go back," Riefenhart suggested. "There's nothing else to see here, is there?" he continued, and the entire squad supported him. And now, finally, our heroes returned to the village of Kadal, where their journey began. The priest, sparing no effort, helped all the local residents who came to him with a request. Riefenhart was surprised at how generous Sillin was with his power until he started handing out gold to everyone. Although, if we consider what a generous image will be attached to the Sacred Order of Philinense after this, then this is a very profitable investment, the magician thought. The Knights of Altian no longer needed to stay in the village, so they set off with the mage. Sir Edward was not at all surprised by Stefan's request to find out more about Rifen. After all, it is not every day that you meet such talented and capable warriors. "It can't be that I'm weaker than him," the captain of Altian was indignant to himself. At this time, in the mountains, looking at the departing knightly detachment, Riefenhart sighed serenely. "Great, now I can meet Ceres," he rejoiced. "Why do you continue to follow me?" the sorcerer asked his red-haired pursuer. "You know that there are such priests who travel around the world, showing him the mercy of the goddess and take care of the believers," Sillin babbled happily. "I was actually thinking about returning to the Holy Order, but I felt like trying myself out as a pilgrim," he continued, while Riefenhart recalled how often those same pilgrims died on their journeys. "And to be in the company of the strongest of men," Sillin whispered passionately, finishing his speech. "Gerard and Todd have a similar look," Riffen was afraid. "I hope they just look at other people's bodies a little differently. Perhaps the Demon King was cursed by someone and is sending him strange people as punishment." Riefenhart had counted on the fact that Sillin was a reasonable guy and would walk off into the sunset if he was asked nicely. "Do as you wish. It's your choice to follow me or not," the magician said. But inwardly, he hoped that the walking first aid kit would join in, since Ceres could get hurt. In the first couple of minutes of the hike, Sillin had already exhausted the sorcerer with questions about his physical condition, and even told him about a new device that alchemists had invented to strengthen muscles called protein. While the two travelers were setting up camp for the night, disgruntled cries could be heard in the beautiful palace. "How did you even conduct the briefing?" Someone behind the closed door was indignant. "Forgive me, young master, I did what I could," the courtier justified himself. "Elves must be loyal to their owners, giving themselves to them with both soul and body," squealed the heir to the Karen Trading Union, Beret. "I knew she was too cheap for a slave. There are such ignorant elves," Beret continued. "I was born with these eyes. I was born like this," the slave muttered, while Beret was discussing how her gaze was annoying. "I don't care how much it costs. Buy me a normal slave. This one is at a discount. Defective. Return her." The nobleman gave the order, finding solace in the arms of the more experienced elves. Elf number 148 was being returned to Elfenheim, a traditional slave market with a long history located in the Principality of Chatan, for the third time. The Principality of Chatan is an entire nation of traders located in the very north of the continent. Riefenhart and Sillin arrived in Zeppelin. Zeppelin is the capital of this principality, the heart of trade routes. The magician told the healer that the merchants in this city felt like they were in chocolate, because this country was basically founded by people of their profession, who bought land from the Kingdom of Grain. Then Sillin began to complain about the mage's fast walking pace. Slowing down, the travelers noticed a scene of violence in the alley. "You slandered the Rollfine Trade Association, you pathetic beggar," shouted a richly dressed fat man with green hair. "I'll teach you a lesson, beggar," continued Tarek, who turned out to be the owner of the Rollfane Association and was now beating the kneeling man with a whip. "Since I hit you, 30 gold should be enough, right?" Tarek squealed, throwing something at the poor man. Gold coins hit the beggar's head, leaving new bruises. Sillin, having made sure that the offenders were moving away, approached the poor man and examined his head, on which blood was visible. "What a terrible person! We need to report him to the police." The healer was indignant, calling for justice in the townspeople who were already rushing about their business. "Are you kidding?" the old man replied happily. "That much money will help me open my own business." "What? You're going to act like nothing happened just because you got paid?" The priest was indignant. "I told you, everyone here is obsessed with money," Riefenhart muttered, watching the man happily jumping up and down as he ran. The magician said that in this city the punishments for breaking the law are acceptable, and if you have money, you won't go to prison. And what business could you possibly have in a city like this? The healer said, disappointed. I want to buy an elf, the magician answered excitedly, knowing that a wave of condemnation would follow. So you're one of those? Seelan asked nervously, covering himself with his hands. Realizing that he couldn't justify himself without revealing his past life, the magician muttered, Oh, think whatever you want, I don't care. The priest said with disgust. Ugh, man. Riffenhart had to remind him that, unfortunately, Seelan was also a male. Somewhere in the expensive halls, Tarek sat on a beautiful chair and reasoned that if traders beg for money from his trade association, it means they are bad traders who are looking for someone to blame for their failures. The elven courtiers eagerly agreed with their master. Barrett clearly did not expect Tarek to visit, and was genuinely surprised when he entered the hall. Tarek was interested in why Beret and his new slave had not developed a relationship, and where she had gone. Upon learning that Karen's heir had failed to tame the elf and had returned her, Tarek laughed and questioned whether Beret would ever be able to bring Karen into the top 10 trading alliances. Baret's doubts that Tarek would be able to tame the elf spurred the fat man to visit Elfenheim soon and buy the impudent girl. The owner of the Rolfane Trading Association couldn't wait to see Beret's stunned face when he managed to calm the rebellious one down. At this time, returning to the hotel room, Riffenhart found Seelan in an interesting position. If he's working out so hard, why aren't his muscles showing up at all? The sorcerer asked himself as the healer, dressed in a t-shirt and sweatpants, did push-ups as hard as he could. Do I look like I've been training? Seelan asked, as Rifen looked over his skinny body. Don't push yourself too hard. I can't lose you because of muscle pain. The magician encouraged his comrade. Yes, everything will be fine. I will be able to move, the healer replied, enveloping himself in a pink haze of the spell. One and done, concluded Seelan, who showed no sign of sweat or fatigue. Riffenhart immediately understood why the priest was not gaining muscle mass. Healing magic is like turning back time, the mage thought to himself. Muscles grow from micro-damage and subsequent regeneration over and over again. But when he heals himself, he only returns them to their original state. The Demon King wanted to yell at his partner. Idiot! You're wasting your time! When Seelan noticed the displeasure on his comrade's face and asked if something was wrong, Riffenhart only promised to show him a more effective training method. They also discussed whether the priest's long hair would interfere with his training, but as it turned out, if he cut it, it would quickly grow back, which in some countries is considered to be associated with indecent thoughts. But we won't go into details. Now that Riffenhart had enough money, he was going to the slave market. Seelan naturally tagged along with him. The auction in Elfenheim sells a wide variety of slaves, but the most popular, of course, are elves, because they are beautiful. The prices for them are much higher than for orcs or gnomes, for example. An elf assassin will cost 800 gold. An ordinary elf slave costs 300 gold, but an elf child costs only 100. Elven boys were sold for 30 gold, orc swordsmen for 10, and orc workers for 5. The cheapest were orc children, who cost 4 gold, and a male elf who was given away for next to nothing due to the frequency of suicide. Another reason for the popularity of elves is their long lifespan and long adolescence, which is why jokes arose that stupid merchants would rather die of old age than pay off elven children. I heard that Elfenheim is a slave market specializing in the sale of elves with a history of 300 years. Seelan sang admiringly, despite Rifen's displeased look. I've never been to an elven slave market. A slave contract in any case, do you think they like it? Riefenhart tried to moderate the joyful mood in the healer, but he waved it off and replied that elves were probably treated better than orcs. Orcs live in the wilderness, Seelan continued. Isn't life under the care of more civilized people better than hunger and death? Yes, that's exactly what the average person thinks, the sorcerer concluded mentally. It is not easy to change people's mentality, and force can only instill fear, he reasoned, recalling his achievements. I need to found a new kind of empire, different from the one I built in the past. Sorry to keep you waiting, sir, the merchant said, interrupting the Demon King's train of thought about a new, fully fledged nation of intelligent races. Here they are, the world-famous slaves of Elfenheim, the same green-haired man declared majestically. The disappointment on the magician's face was dictated by the fact that he did not find a familiar face in any of the elves. The merchant didn't pay any attention to this. He was very amused by the red-haired lady's reaction to his elves. After all, not every gentleman brings a young lady with him to such a place. Are there any elves with dark skin? The magician asked. While the elven pimp admired his master's refined taste, Sillin tried to shame Rifen, as if it wasn't he who had talked about the harm of slavery 5 minutes ago. We have one dark-skinned slave, the green-haired man remembered, and led the clients to the exit of the hall. As they walked along the long corridors of the luxurious building, the travelers were given a short tour. Our elves receive the proper education, the merchant said. We use special teaching methods so that our goods are always in demand. They are fed only fresh nuts, fruits, and vegetables, he continued as they walked past the open kitchen. Proper nutrition helps them smell good. Pride was evident in his voice. Thin elves at the slave market are a common sight, but ours are quite different. I don't need your explanations, just take me to that elf, Riffenhart said angrily, unable to bear the boastful speech. The elven pimp became embarrassed, and they walked the rest of the way in silence. I want number 148, the man said as they approached a gate guarded by several knights. Here we have some of our young candidates for assassins. They are being trained here, said the merchant as the doors swung open. Here is the product you are so interested in. Riffenhart no longer heard anything. He saw Cirrus in the crowd of fighting elves. His eyes instantly filled with tears and a lump formed in his throat. Her hair was cut untidily, obscuring her eyes, but he would have recognized Cirrus from any body part in any universe. In a few seconds, she would throw her curls back and reveal her wonderful amber eyes to this world. But right now, Riffenhart was already falling into memories. Before the eyes of the magician, his laboratory in the Delphic Tower appears, in which rare plants, crystals, models of spells, and a huge number of books were collected. Sir Riffenhart, you can't mix this, Cirrus shouts as the sorcerer pours the red liquid into the test tube. Who would mix fire flowers with stone seeds anyway? The brave elf continues to scold Riffenhart after his mixture blew up the tower wall. Sorry, I think I just got distracted by something, the magician stammered awkwardly. But it seemed the girl didn't believe him, because she heard this excuse every time their experiments ended in an explosion. And lately this was happening more and more often. Don't move, your face is all dirty, Cirrus asked, wiping the soot from the sorcerer's cheeks and wondering why she was so attracted to him despite his venerable age. How long will you call me Sir Riffenhart? The magician asked the girl. Call me as usual. I can't, the elf whispered quietly. And then the sweet scene in the laboratory was replaced by a fire that engulfed the Riffenhart Empire in flames. He stood on the balcony of his palace and watched as what he had spent many years building smoldered. His closest allies, the people he considered friends and family, appeared behind him. He was afraid of losing each of them, so he didn't want these destructive actions that people brought with them. I have come to greet you one last time, my lord, said the orc Tahiti. Atilka, Mashalin, Cirrus, what's wrong with your faces? Is this the first time you've seen someone on the brink of a grave? Riefenhart chuckled. You know that 2 million soldiers from all over the continent have gathered to crush the Demon King, the mage boasted. Perhaps all of humanity's fighting power has gathered here. I wonder how they'll deal with the aftermath. Their countries are completely incapacitated, all for one fight? Riefenhart wondered out loud. They don't even think about accepting our right to exist, my lord, Tahid supported Mr. The orc asked if the Demon King wanted to leave the castle with them. However, he was sure that they would only be able to leave alive if he stayed here. Riefenhart apologized to Owl then for losing even with the divine guarantee behind him. Only it wasn't a guarantee, it was a prophecy. And it went like this. Keep the elf close while the orc makes the way. The one who can pass the Daemon Abyss and tear down the Pillar of Hawkrul will come soon, so follow him. He will change your fate and grant you salvation. I was so surprised, Riffenhart recalled. I had just destroyed some shrine, and the gnomes suddenly proclaimed me a savior. I hope the day will come when we will meet again. Owl Pot will give, said Mashalin, receiving the same warm words and wishes for survival from the magician in response. I will wait for you, Mr. Riefenhart, said the elf, saying goodbye to the magician. Nobody knows what fate has in store for us. If something happens to me, I hope you can find yourself a worthy partner, the magician said, struggling against the lump in his throat. Ceres repeated to Riffenhart several times that she would wait for him, and she even had to raise her voice and yell at him to make him understand the seriousness of her intentions. The mage's worried black eyes and the elf's cold amber eyes met. A second later, their lips met, and Riffenhart wanted this farewell to never end. To be honest, I'm ashamed to show her to customers, the elf merchant interrupted the wizard's stream of memories. She's completely unteachable, a defective product. She's been returned 3 times already. The merchant said that she was very skilled, but because of her terrible character, the dark elf had to be used to train other trainees to become full-fledged assassins. Are you still interested in buying? The merchant asked ingratiatingly. But he didn't need to ask because Riffenhart's eyes were following the girl, and he answered yes without hesitation. Having decided that he needed to shake 100 more out of this pervert, the merchant asked the magician for 300 gold for the goods. I repeat, the product is defective, frankly. I'm not sure I should sell it at all, the green-haired man said when the priest was surprised by the price tag. Are you the new master? The elf asked when she was introduced to Riffenhart. The magician noticed a huge number of scars on his beloved and could not imagine what kind of torture she was subjected to here. The merchant offered to call a priest to heal the elf's wounds, but Rifen asked Sillin to do it himself. Throwing his warm jacket over the girl's shoulders, the magician remembered that the elf still didn't have a name. What if your name is Cirrus? Riffenhart suggested. The elf did not argue, and when asked if she liked the name, she replied that she remembered what her name was now. Your full name is Cirrus Valencia, the magician instructed the girl, carefully wrapping her in clothes. And despite her objections that a slave is not given a last name, he asked her to remember it. Then the magician told her his real name and introduced Sillin. I understand, the girl replied, still wondering why the owner had given her a personal surname when he could have given her his own. After some time, new guests arrived in Elfenheim. Number 148 has already been purchased, the merchant mumbled. Tarek was indignant when he heard that the 148th had left an hour ago with a new owner. Did Beret really understand what I had planned and bought the elf back? The owner of the Rolofane Trading Association doubted. The buyer was a young man I'd never seen before, the elven pimp admitted. He paid in cash, so I didn't ask any questions. Tarek again doubted the honesty of the slave trader. After all, not everyone could carry enough cash to buy an elf, even if her price was not the highest. A young guy with a strong build, you'll understand as soon as you see him. The pimp gave a self-portrait of the buyer to Tarek. At this time, Riefenhart no longer had time for squabbles in Elfenheim. He watched as the elf examined her new equipment in complete delight and with a modicum of faith that this was all a dream. We'll make do with this for now, and then I'll buy you better equipment, the magician promised his beloved. When asked if the elf was hungry, she replied that she would follow the will of her master. Riffenhart was surprised and said that she could not call him master. Cirrus immediately decided that it was because he was bringing her back. What? Of course not, that's not what I meant, the magician justified himself, while the elf was confused as to why he was treating her like an ordinary girl. I mean, you can think of me as a comrade you're traveling with. Riffenhart smiled the most charming smile this stupid body had to offer. Don't call me sir, call me by my name, okay? This pervert seems to like role-playing games where he is an adventurer, Cirrus thought. And his favorite type of game is saving a beauty, like a hero, she concluded, and said out loud that she would call him Riffenhart. All people are the same, the voices whispered in Cirrus's head, even as she stuffed herself to the brim in the tavern. In front of her stood a huge variety of dishes, and Riffenhart was talking next to her about how the Redanti's Mercy was the most popular restaurant in Zeppelin. They took advantage of the name of the goddess Redanti, known as the patroness of a bountiful harvest, who gives food, so we considered ourselves part of the flock. The magician continued to entertain his comrades with stories. Rifen and Sillin argued a bit about how the clans profit from the names of the goddesses, remembering that the cult of Philinense is also not without sin, and makes money from beauty services. Well, of course, she is the goddess of love and beauty. After all, this does not contradict the canons of our religion, the priest justified himself, ignoring the fact that one service costs a whole mountain of gold. Riffenhart paused from their little argument to watch Cirrus eat a giant lobster. He couldn't figure out if she liked the local cuisine and company. After all, the magician brought her here to honor the memory of their first anniversary. But then he appeared before Cirrus as a savior, and now she sees him only as a buyer. The first meeting can cause completely opposite impressions, and the magician wondered if he should have come later. However, sooner or later Cirrus will understand the meaning of his words and actions, and he is quite happy with that. These are the best products in our store, you won't find anything like this anywhere else, said the weapon seller, laying out all the sharp things he had on the counter in front of the travelers. Riffenhart was surprised when the elf chose a rapier. Don't you usually use a saber? He asked Cirrus. Wow, it's not for nothing that they say that martial artists can tell who wields what weapon just by looking at their hands. Sillin admired, while the sorcerer's beloved was angry at his insight. I never thought that I would ever have the mithril-based weapon that I dreamed of so much. The priest continued to admire as they continued on their way, having stocked up on everything they needed. Why would a priest need a weapon at all? Riefenhart wondered. And before he could receive an answer, his gaze was drawn to a strange gathering in the alley. A A squad of 6 fighters seemed to be waiting for our heroes. "Can I have a word with you?" their leader asked, turning to the sorcerer. From the look in Riffenhart's eyes, it was clear that he would have preferred anything but a few words. "What's the matter?" the magician asked haughtily. "A certain famous aristocrat wishes to obtain this elf," the man said, pointing his finger at Cirrus. The elf's face immediately changed from irritatedly neutral to irritatedly angry. "So what?" Riffenhart demanded furiously. "He is willing to offer a reasonable price for the slave," the squad leader promised and handed the magician an envelope. "If you wish, we can replace her with another one of higher quality. Please take a look." Riffenhart refused to accept the envelope from the man's hands, saying that he was not interested in such deals. "It seems you didn't understand. I told you that my master was offering a reasonable price," the postman continued to insist, not accepting refusals. "It's you who don't understand. I repeat, I'm not interested," the magician said through clenched teeth. "You seem to be attracted to this elf," the opponent stated factually. "I see you are stubborn. In which case you left me no choice," said the man, gathering his squad and walking away. That evening, there were some very restless conversations in the luxurious chambers. "What? Why did you come back empty-handed, Romand?" Tarek scolded his servant. "You could have smeared it and sprinkled coins on top." "He won't sell it no matter the price. He has very naive ideas about this world," Romand tried to justify himself. "Besides, there were a lot of eyes there. I decided it was better to adhere to the norms of decency." Servant of Tarek about his plan. "We'll wait for the right chance to kidnap this elf and then tell the guy that she's dead and offer double the price. The girl was sold for next to nothing anyway." Tarek approved of Romand's plan and suggested taking Sir Lantis with him so that he wouldn't hang around doing nothing. Riefenhart was not aware of the evil plans of the owner of the Rollifen trading associations, so he rested peacefully in the hotel. He poured out all the gold he had from the bottomless bag in front of him. The 2,000 gold pieces he had stolen from the ruins seemed at once a huge sum, and yet quite small when one considered his plans to found a new empire. The sorcerer seriously thought about investing so as not to carry these heavy things around with him just like that. If we recall the lessons of history, then in the near future the kingdom of Crovens will be struck by famine. A country of farmers, where, thanks to the fertile soil and generous harvests granted by the goddess of the earth, Redanti, there have never been any reserves made in case of famine. Investing in grain is a wise choice because next spring, famine will raise a wave of deaths and terrible images of parents eating their own children. 3 major trading groups came to mind: Rollifain, Karen, and Tauban. But Riefenhart knew for sure that he was not going to invest in Rollifain, since the founder of this trading group had bullied Sirius in the past. If he had to choose between the remaining 2, he would choose Taobeng, as they specialize in grain sales and are Rollifain's main competitor. The head of the Taoban Trading Association, Seavold, sat in his office and lamented that because of the unscrupulousness of the head of Rollifain, he could be left without partners, profitable deals, and even without work. The secretary said that Seavold had a visitor who wanted to make an investment, but since the locals could not offer a good amount, the head of the association asked the secretary to send the man away. "But he offers a large sum, sir," said the secretary excitedly. "I want to invest 1,500 gold pieces in grain," Riefenhart said with a smile when he was finally allowed into the office. Bags of gold on the table of the head of the association proved the seriousness of the intentions of the newly minted investor. "Please fill my warehouses in the kingdom of Crovens for the barley harvest next spring," the mage asked. "But selling grain in Crovens is like selling soap to an orc," Seavold doubted. "No one will buy it." Riefenhart insisted on his own, despite assurances from the head of the trading association that he would not allow money to be invested in a clearly failed business. "If you don't want to do it, I'll just go invest in another trade union," the magician muttered, taking the bags of gold from the table and ending the useless argument. "To be honest, our business is going through hard times right now," Seavold revealed his cards. "But with your investment, we can easily survive them and even succeed. I just want to offer you a more profitable investment. It's my money, so I'll decide where to invest it. Just draw up a contract," Riefenhart asked, remembering that in his past life, Seavold had been a very unyielding person. "Promise me just one thing, not to use my contribution for personal purposes," the magician threatened the merchant, taking a promise from him. Afterwards, Riefen asked if there was a branch of the Taoban Trade Association in the Kingdom of Grain, and Seavold assured him that there was, since they were just building a trade route to the northern regions. But the magician didn't care about the northern regions. He needed a branch near the Magic Tower of Delphia, which, unfortunately, the merchant did not have. But the path to the branch in Ronta passed right through those places. The mage took this opportunity to find out how young Reifenhart was doing in Delphia, asking the merchant to pass on any information about the sorcerer that could be obtained. Meanwhile, in the courtyard of the hotel, Cirrus continued training and handling the new weapon, under the supervision of Scylla. Each swing of the blade cut through the air near the young elf's hair, making her 1,000 times more beautiful. Scylla, who initially wanted to learn a couple of techniques from the elf, stood to the side and watched her training with admiration. For Cirrus, training was a substitute for meditation, allowing her to briefly delve into the past. High elves were originally meant to be guardians of the forest, said an incredibly beautiful adult elf, stroking Cirrus's hair. While the little elf lay on her mother's lap, she told her that they lived in eternal grace under the protection of the World Tree, Elfenheim, where every living creature is a friend, and the trees provide the elves with food. And although people oppress us, putting us in a miserable position, one day Elida will show us all the way to paradise. Cirrus heard her mother's voice. We are the heirs of the great fairy, my beloved daughter. Never forget about pride. My mother's words overlapped with the memories of the burning house and the destroyed elven settlement. After the death of her parents, Cirrus ended up with an elf who prepared her for life in a better place. For this, she had to learn to be loyal and polite, as befits a good, nice elf. The girl was regularly beaten and subjected to domestic torture. For example, they might not feed her for a few days to make her more obedient. Her kind mocked her, and her pure-blood heritage only gave them more reason to mock her. In those days, only the sword saved her, because all the adults she remembered wielded a sword, and they fought bravely and died with honor. That's why Cirrus loved this weapon so much. Swinging the sword, she recalled the image of her parents who were fiercely fighting for their lives. Time passed and memories faded, but Cirrus kept one phrase forever in her heart. My beloved daughter, never forget about pride. Loud bangs brought Cirrus back from her memories to the real world. That was so cool. How do you move like that? Scylla asked in admiration. You just have to try your best, the elf answered sincerely. Oh my god, it's like I'm listening to instructions from Rifen. Are all warriors like this? Scylla asked rhetorically as he mimicked powerful blows in the air. It's like that, huh? But the priest did not have time to receive an answer, because their training was interrupted by the phrase, There you are. You will come with us, elf, Roman barked, implying that his orders were not to be discussed. We will take you to the real master, he continued, not daring to hold back his smile. Even a fool could decipher the elf's warlike gaze. She had no intention of going anywhere with Romand. A whole squad of men, dressed in such a way that it was impossible to tell whether they were mercenaries or government employees, lined up, blocking the only exit from the hotel courtyard. Who the hell are you? St. Scylla shouted. While the priest reminded Romand that the elf was not for sale, the former only smiled and repeated that no one would come to the aid of the travelers. At some point, Scylla's loud screams got to Romand, and he rushed at the healer with a sword. The ringing of metal deafened the priest when the soldier's sword met the elf's nimble blade. Having repelled Romand's attack, she went on the attack against his unit. The elf, unlike Rifen, did not try to spare people and calmly inflicted fatal wounds. This provoked her opponents because everyone was sure that it would not be so difficult to deal with the girl. Ceres successfully dodged the squad's attacks and delivered her own pinpoint strikes. Her blade turned red and her eyes blazed with fury. The elf killed men before they could touch her. A drop of sweat appeared near Romand's eye, apparently from fear. The squad leader could no longer resist the thought that the 148th was unusually strong. Dear Philinense, crush these ignoramuses with your iron rod, Silanus prayed. Ceres grabbed the priest by the shoulder and moved him from his place before he could complete the spell. A sword thrown by someone flew to the place where Scylla had stood before. If a pilgrim dies, no one will even blink an eye, right? The squad leader encouraged his soldiers, and it immediately became clear that the sword had flown to Scylla from him. What is this freak talking about? The priest was indignant, but Ceres convinced him that everything was fine. After the elf was sure that the healer was not going to do anything rash, she spun her blade and moved towards the men. Getting into a fighting stance, she cast a defiant glance at Romand. These guys are no problem at all, Ceres said mockingly. She would have said these words as many times as she wanted, if only the commander's expression would always remain the same surprised, angry one. Time to get to work, Tallcat, Roman called to someone. Ceres stood surrounded by the dead bodies of men who thought it would be an easy task to deal with her. But when an orc the size of her new master entered the inn courtyard, even the elf's knees began to tremble slightly. Scylla, although he had seen everything, was still just as nervous as Ceres. Talcata is working, the orc growled loudly. Catch the elf. The orc's vocal apparatus does not allow them to fully reproduce human speech, but from the big guy's phrase, "Sorry, that's fate," Cirrus caught the true essence. "Forgive me, but that's fate. Nothing can be done. Better to accept it." The elf thought that the orc was much stronger than the human squad, and that she would have to try very hard to deal with him. Commander Romand ordered Talcat to seize the 148th and not damage the goods. Cirrus' blade met the orc's mighty sword. The sword bounced strangely off the elf's weapon, as if it had bent. The next moment, Cirrus felt the sword hit her hard in the back. Apparently, he deliberately curved the blade to perform this maneuver. The elf was ready to swear that after such a thing the sword should have been broken. But she examined the enemy's weapon and made sure that it was intact. Now she was sure that the fight with the orc would not be easy. "You shouldn't have left the saber in the room," the elf noted briefly. Ceres did a deft somersault to get above her opponent's head and strike him in a vulnerable spot. But the orc was not a fool, and immediately put up a block with his sword. "What are you messing around with there?" Romand yelled. "Can't you even handle an elven girl?" Talcata thought with disappointment that it seemed he would not be given food again today. The orc's heavy boots blasted the beautifully laid tiles of the inn's palace as he charged towards Cirrus again. Swinging his sword, Talcata hoped to scare the elf. After all, he had no plans to cripple her. However, his opponent did not even allow herself to think about stopping. Confusion and horror filled the orc's face. He struck with his sword from above, as if he was going to cut the girl in half, but she stopped his sword with her small blade. But what scared Talcata most was not the elf's ability to fight, but her gaze. She looked as if she was not afraid to die, and most importantly, Cirrus did not dodge, only repelled the attacks. Talcata put away his sword, leaving room for the bold elf to maneuver. The opponent smiled as if he had done exactly what she expected from him. A second later, Cirrus plunged her blade into the orc's armor. Blood stained the tiles of the hotel's courtyard. The elf's eyes burned with either rage or the excitement of battle. "I almost killed her. What would have happened if I hadn't changed the trajectory?" The orc was indignant, looking straight into the eyes of his battle partner. "I believed you would make it," Cirrus smiled. "Can you block thrown blades?" Scylla shouted, tearing the elf away from her mental suppression of her opponent. "I believe in you," said the priest and began to cast a spell. Roman cursed and prepared to throw another blade. "I told you to stand still," he growled and released the weapon towards the red-haired healer. Ceres materialized right in the path of the flying blade. She playfully repelled Roman's attack, breaking his blade in two. Meanwhile, the entire courtyard seemed to be shrouded in a pink haze, and painted skeletons on rattles hung in the air, the very saints to whom Scylla always called. "Please crush these bastards with all your strength, Saint Philinense," the priest prayed. The elf had never seen her companion's strength in action, so she was seriously surprised, and Roman seemed to have shit his pants when he saw the saints. With their arms crossed over their chests and their mouths open, the skeletons of the Philinense family looked more like demonic creatures than anything religious. Roman's subordinates were in a stupor. They had no instructions on how to fight the Holy Spirit. And then a huge explosion blew the hotel courtyard into pieces, throwing up the once neatly laid tiles. "Although divine power is meant to fight demons and the living dead," the saint spoke quickly as explosions continued to sound behind him, "it will help us buy time. Let's run quickly." "Understood," Cirrus replied, and grabbed the priest by the back of his robe. She threw the soldier's sword that she found on the ground, and he entered the wall almost halfway with the blade. The elf used the sword as a step, jumping onto it. She bounced upward, and here Cirrus, with a healer in one hand and a blade in the other, was flying gracefully toward the second-floor window. As they broke the glass and flew into the hotel, the elf covered Scylla's head with her hands, not caring that she might hurt her own. "Talcata, get after them quickly!" Romand yelled as the pink haze left the yard and the aftermath of the explosion subsided a little. Someone from the side laughed slightly and asked if Romand and his team had screwed up again and missed one little elf. A slave who fights on equal terms with an experienced orc warrior? The bearded man continued to grin, while the squad leader tried to justify himself by saying that they already practically had her in their hands. "Well then, it's my turn. Where did it go?" the bearded man decided. Romand pointed him in the direction and tried not to even look in his direction while he accepted the task. An expensively dressed, fair-haired, bearded man leapt into the air in one leap. His painted cloak flashed in the same window where Cirrus and Scylla landed. Romand was not delighted with the bearded man's manner of constantly bragging about his strength and skills, but even he noted that to rise so high in one jump is difficult and commendable. However, the bearded dude had an aura, so it was easy as pie for him. "Well, hide, my dear, hide!" the bearded man sang playfully when he realized that he had lost his prey. After all, Sirius and Scylla were already far from the hotel. Sometime before the bearded man was brought to their case, the travelers ran to their room to collect the rest of their equipment. Scylla suggested this idea because even if there was an ambush waiting there, they could handle one or two opponents. Sirius was genuinely surprised by the healer's reasoning. Before that, she had considered him a naive child. Naturally, there was a soldier from Roman's detachment standing near Riffenhart's room. He raised his head and saw the elf jumping towards him at great speed. Sirius kicked her opponent right in the bridge of the nose, knocking him out for the rest of the evening. "Do you think we have time to change?" Scylla lamented as the elf tried to put on all the equipment she had bought. "Grab what you can and run." "Oh, Philinense, erase our traces, protect us from danger, and give us a second wind." The saint whispered a simple spell, and the room began to shine with cleanliness, as if no one had lived in it before. Meanwhile, in the present, Lanthus was walking down the corridors of the hotel, a swordsman who had reached a certain level of fencing and had even mastered the aura. The one who owns the aura is able to slightly sense the movements of all living beings within 30 meters, and even walls will not become an obstacle for him. That child is able to erase traces of presence like a high-ranking priest? Lanthus was surprised, remembering the red-haired healer, and kicking down the door of the room. The swordsman was convinced that the travelers had fled when he saw a completely clean and, most importantly, empty room behind the broken door. "Don't tell me they got away again, Sir Lanthus," Romand asked, following the swordsman into the room. "Let the dogs go, they couldn't have gone far," Lanthus smiled. Meanwhile, the priest and the elf ran wherever their eyes looked, meandering through the courtyards and alleys of the city of Zeppelin. Ceres first suggested that they get lost in the crowd, but Scylla was sure that they should avoid people as much as possible, because no one would help slaves running away from their owners. "Even the Holy Order won't help us, now I understand why pilgrims die more often than flies," thought Scylla. But the prospect of giving in now and returning to the power of a strong lady, as frail as he was more frightening than the current chase. "If Mr. Riffin were here, everything would have been resolved already," lamented the priest. "Where the hell is he?" "We must find him at any cost," muttered Scylla, starting to cast a spell and ignoring Sirius's question about the master's true strength. "Oh, Philinense, have mercy, show us the thread of fate," the healer prayed. "See how painful our separation is and reunite us." Painting the city with pink lines before the travelers, a fork in the road of fate appeared. "Love can forge destiny from chance," Scylla explained to the elf. "A chance meeting becomes a destiny at the behest of love. A man meets a woman and says, 'Among the countless men and women of the continent, our meeting is like a miracle.' The probability of such an accident may be extremely small, but with Philinense's blessing, it becomes destiny. Actually, this spell is meant to find suitable matches, but we have a different goal now," Scylla thought. The priest praised Ceres, noting that she seemed stronger than Lelsia, the only elven assassin he knew. Ceres responded to the healer with a reciprocal compliment on his abilities, noting that he had an incredibly high rank for his young age, which incredibly flattered Scylla and made him think that communicating with the elf was like talking to a friend, not a slave. "Are we here?" Ceres asked, emerging from the alley into a wide square surrounded by several towers. "Yes, this is where the thread breaks," Scylla replied, noticing that one of the towers had collapsed. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps made the travelers turn around. Lanthus reluctantly emerged from the arch, dragging his feet along the ground. "This is not Mr. Riffenhart," Ceres remembered, covering the priest with her body. "I got caught, kids," said the stranger. "Thanks to you, I got a good workout." A bearded and expensively dressed gentleman moved towards our heroes and advised them not to run away anymore. But the elf herself realized that running away and exposing their backs was pointless. She needed to give battle immediately and leave quickly, having defeated her opponent. Ceres struck with her blade, but the enemy managed to dodge. "These aren't beginner skills, you're quite talented," Lanthus said, appearing behind the elf. He continued to talk about her must have been training hard and her successes as Ceres continued to make more and more attacks. The elf kept thinking about who this rich and impudent gentleman could be. "Oh, Philinense, grant your servant the courage of a lion," the priest asked, thinking the same thing as Ceres, that with such skills a man is known in the world of knights or swordsmen. "Fill the hands that grip the sword with the strength of giants themselves. Let her gaze become like an eagle's, and her legs become like those of a bull, so that she can crush the enemies on her way." Scylla finished his prayer. "A holy strike?" Lanthus was surprised. To cast so many holy spells at once is not even the level of a high-ranking priest, but a bishop level. I'm quite famous in the south of Vasily, if you want to know, Scylla boasted and encouraged his battle friend, directing her into battle with the consecrated sword. With the priest's blessing, you have changed beyond recognition. Lantis tried to distract the elf with conversation, delivering a critical blow. The blessed sword cracked and shattered into pieces all over the area. Ceres gripped the hilt of the cracked sword and looked into the eyes of her opponent. "But you got too carried away while I was playing with you," the swordsman said disappointedly, and struck the elf, letting her blood stain the pavement. Scylla turned pale and noticed that the aura was coloring the air around his opponent. "Who would have thought that a slave would force me to use aura?" Lantis muttered. "What is a swordsman with an aura doing here?" Scylla was indignant, trying to help the wounded Ceres. They can live anywhere in luxury, he thought. Hiring one to capture a slave is like using a dragon to light a furnace. Arriving at the scene of the battle, Roman addressed the swordsman by name, and then Scylla realized who was in front of him and called out to him, causing Lantis to be surprised. Of course, Scylla knew who Lantis was, just a famous knight in the Taken Kingdom, the heir of a noble family who displayed astonishing military prowess after awakening his aura after the age of 30. The entire Taken Kingdom rejoiced at the arrival of a new aura lord. However, Lantis had a secret of his own that he could not share with anyone. He had a terrible fetish that began with elven slaves and extended even to royalty, and was then inevitably revealed in high society. Sir Lantis became the greatest disgrace in the history of the Taken Kingdom. "You're a monster! You disappeared into the Chatan Principality, huh?" Scylla asked, remembering how he was scared as a child that if he stayed out late, Lantis would catch him. While the priest was indignant at how the owner of the aura could engage in such dirty deeds that truly justified his reputation, Lantis only laughed that he was working for his salary. "In Takon, I killed hundreds of slaves, and then I fled here," said the Dark Knight. "Besides, I like to play tag." Roman had no complaints whatsoever against Lantis. After all, his dishonor was nothing compared to the benefit that hiring the Lord of the Aura provided. Over the past 10 years, the Rolafane Trading Association has become the second largest in the Chatan Principality, and this is thanks to Lantis. "Let's suppress your divine power for a moment," the knight said, pointing his fingers, shrouded in aura, towards the priest. "You see, I have a good understanding of what a high-ranking priest can do if he is allowed to talk freely," Lantis continued, as invisible aura bullets slammed into Scylla's body. Roman asked the knight to be careful not to hurt the elf even more. But Lantis just waved him off and replied that he could always hire a priest and heal the damaged goods. "By the way, this young priest also looks cute," the Dark Knight said, and asked Roman to take Scylla with him. "Wait, I'm actually a guy," the red-haired healer protested. "Boy?" Lantis was surprised, his eyes lighting up strangely. "Well, this will be an unusual experience." "I'll take good care of you," Roman promised the priest, holding out his hand. Slicing through the offered hand with his mithril blade, Scylla stood up and shouted something like, "Don't you dare! Don't touch me!" Lantis's eyes nearly popped out of his head. "Your tendons must be torn. How did you get up without treatment?" the swordsman asked. Seeing that Scylla was trying to cover the lying elf with his body, the knight continued to put moral pressure on the priest. "You are probably the most beautiful, fragile, and trembling zombie in the world. It looks like I'll have to cut off your little legs," Lantis smiled, and saw the furious horror on the red-haired guy's face. At that moment, the walls of the square seemed to explode and raise a storm of dust around. Lantis looked sideways at the explosion with displeasure, sensing that they had come for his soul. Scylla's spirits were lifted when he saw such a familiar face. "Found you, bastards," Riefenhart said through clenched teeth. "How dare you covet Ceres?" he yelled, gathering his aura into a fist. The red-haired warrior took a step out of the hole in the wall that he had made himself and took off his warm coat. Lantis knew from one look at the guy that something was wrong with him. "This is not just a young guy who was lucky with his physique," the knight reasoned. "I can feel a very strong aura coming from him." Roman revealed that this was the slave's current owner, surprising Lantis, who thought that the elf was owned by some brat. All of Lantis's senses were going crazy from the mere presence of the red-haired guy, and that fool Roman was calling him a brat. The fact that the knight can't count the guy's level while being the owner of the aura only means that the brat also has it, despite his youth. "Thank you for protecting Ceres," the mage thanked Scylla and asked him to hold his coat. "I haven't met such strong people for a long time," the Dark Knight said, turning to the elf's owner, thinking that perhaps the guy was over 30 and just looked younger. Riefenhart exhaled and grinned evilly. "Don't you dare make chivalrous speeches being a dirty, perverted old man." The magician snapped angrily. "Attack!" An aura glowed in a red haze around the dark night, matching his wild eyes. The orange aura of the magician, like a ray of sunshine, enveloped him from head to toe. From the side, it seemed as if he was in the center of a fire. The Demon King rushed towards his opponent, thrusting forward a fist full of energy. The knight, however, chose not to change his habits and imbued his faithful sword with aura. Both opponents moved as if in slow motion to each other, but observers saw only flashes of energy. As the two opponents clashed, an orange-red explosion erupted around them. The people in the square could not even distinguish the figures of the knight and the warrior in the bright flames. Lantis looked up at the heated Riffenhart. The red-haired warrior swung and prepared to strike, his eyes burning with rage. There was mockery in the knight's eyes. He did not take this fight seriously. The young warrior and the dark knight continued to strike each other. When their faces were too close in the heat of battle, Riffenhart could have sworn that Lantis laughed. Romand, like his soldiers, decided that the best solution would be to retreat, because if they were caught between two madmen with aura, there would be no one to pick up their bodies piece by piece. Sillin used the time between Riffenhart and Lantis's fight to heal Cirrus. "Does Mr. Riffenhart really have an aura?" the elf said in confusion. When the priest confirmed Cirrus's suspicions, something akin to admiration lit up her eyes. Lantis didn't understand where the child had managed to gain such a level of mastery over the aura. "He fights as if he didn't receive it yesterday," the knight concluded, attacking the red-haired warrior with a sword imbued with aura. If there was one thing Riffenhart knew how to dodge, it was that these attacks weren't scary to him. The magician gathered his will and energy into a fist and launched a Kwai bullet technique at the enemy. Did he really open his aura as a teenager but somehow manage to retain his baby face into his 40s? Lanthus thought as he took another punch to the gut. Such a possibility is complete nonsense. The knight was indignant. Riffenhart crushed everything he saw on the way to his opponent. Why is he so strong? How dare the pervert who laid his hands on Cirrus use such strength and skills? The mage seethed internally. Whoever claims that martial arts build good character needs to be punched in the face, Riffen said, upset. Having climbed onto the ruins of the tower, the knight watched the warrior from afar. The fact that the boy can knock my sword away with one swing of his hand is incredible skill, thought Lantis. Realizing that the only option in this situation was a competent mentor. "Are you a disciple of the martial arts king, Gerard?" the knight asked the warrior. Riffenhart chuckled. He wasn't about to give away his training secrets to this pervert. "And why do you care so much about this slave when you are so strong?" the bearded swordsman continued. "Now repeat what you just said," Riffen squeezed out through his teeth. "Those you call slaves have feelings and will," he began to shout. Lantis stared at the angry boy in bewilderment. "Have you even tried talking to them?" the red-haired warrior asked, gathering aura in his fists. "Have you ever wondered why they became like this?" The blast wave that Riefenhart had created with his blow blew away the rubble of the tower, and the knight flew down. "I have no idea what you're trying to prove," Lantis replied, attempting an airborne attack. The magician thought that this was a typical human reaction, the unshakable belief that any creature other than man is second class. This idea was too ingrained in the minds of mankind. And how are humans any better than elves that they allow themselves to subjugate them? Riffenhart continued to ask, knowing that humanity could clearly see how representatives of other species cried and laughed, but still refused to admit that they had feelings. "It's natural that we, being the pinnacle of evolution, make them slaves." The knight tried to reason with his interlocutor. "Who are they if not slaves?" Lanthus's voice echoed in Riffenhart's head. "Why should the descendants of great spirits bear such a heavy cross?" The magician tried to convey his thought to the knight for the last time. "Does it really not even occur to you that if people were not at the helm, they themselves could very well become slaves?" he shouted and delivered one of his signature blows. Lanthus was unable to withstand such aura and fury and flew to another part of the square. When humans enslaved the orcs, humanity celebrated their victory with gusto. When they deprived the dwarves of their will, they also had fun and laughed. And when they subjugated the elves to their power, they enjoyed the triumph. Such is human nature. "If you allow slavery to exist," Riffenhart yelled, "be prepared to become a slave yourself one day," he finished, falling on his opponent's head from the air. "Are you crazy? Do you really think that elves are equal to humans?" the knight replied, not paying attention to the fact that the last blows had knocked the spirit and blood out of him. Riffenhart took a long run up to strike. "No Ceres is a slave," he shouted, approaching his opponent. Lantis managed to dodge, and Riffenhart's blow landed on the wall of another tower. As long as the slave system flourishes on the continent, even people who are unfortunate enough to be weaker than others are part of it, the mage continued to reflect. Defending an unjust ideology will always backfire. Only the stupidest people don't understand such basic things. If this vicious circle is not broken, Riffenhart was having an internal monologue, but he was not distracted from the battle, and having gained a huge amount of aura, he kicked the enemy in the chest. If we don't try to change the false ideas, one day everyone will live in fear, the mage thought, as Lantis crashed face first into one of the stone walls. Beads of sweat were running down the knight's face. It was clear that the battle had really exhausted him. The young warrior looked like he was ready to fight for another couple hundred hours. This must be fixed, Riffenhart concluded his internal monologue. I will put an end to this at any cost. The Demon King grabbed the pervert knight and began to slam his head against the wall. Lantis's head left cracks in the wall. Each time they grew wider and wider, and then bricks began to fall out. In the end, Riffenhart threw the knight out of the square through the hole his head had made. Let Lantis continue for several spans and end in the wall of one of the last surviving towers. I will change this, no matter what, Riffenhart declared, not paying attention to the fact that part of his monologue remained only inside his consciousness. So that no one would call Cirrus a slave again, the magician continued. So that no one would even think about enslavement again. For her sake, I will change this damn world, Riffenhart concluded, not seeing the impression he made on the elf at that moment. I thought he was just another crazy bastard, Cirrus mused. But how obsessed with role-playing games do you have to be to spout such nonsense about elves not being slaves? Is he really a hopeless pervert? The elf was even slightly upset. And yet, to be honest, the magician's words awakened something in Cirrus. She remembered her mother talking about how they were descendants of great spirits. Perhaps the young master knows history well and is really trying to help? Hope flashed in the elf's eyes. Meanwhile, Lantis, under the rubble of the tower, begged for mercy. When Riffenhart demanded a reason why he should forgive the filthy pervert, Lantis assured him that he had repented and was ready to reflect on his sins and do only good for the rest of his days. Your expression tells me you're not lying, the magician began. But I really hate the holy order of the Sayer, which allows you to do whatever you want as long as you come to the temple with repentance. Riffenhart finished his thought, noting that if Lantis had truly repented, he would have gone to prison and not strolled around the temples. I am ready to surrender to the authorities, the shameless knight begged. You don't need to dirty your hands for a worthless person like me. My hands are already covered in blood up to the elbows, the red-haired warrior said in a sepulchral voice, remembering his past in the body of the Demon King. But so be it, I believe you, he showed understanding. If you truly repented, you must have thought that you deserved to die, that it would be better to die quickly to pay for your actions, right? The magician asked the knight. Sillin and Cirrus saw Rifen raise his mighty fist and lift it over the rubble of the wall that had trapped the knight. The red-haired warrior makes one precise blow, and it becomes clear to his companions that the knight will not emerge from under the rubble alive. You shouldn't use the word remorse so thoughtlessly. Riffenhart leaves posthumous advice to Lantis. A piece of shit like that wouldn't know it anyway. Knight covers the remains of the former architecture of the square and buries the secrets of the recent battle. As expected from a walking first aid kit, Sillin cured Cirrus, which the mage was incredibly happy about. Are you okay, Riffenhart? The elf asked. The magician couldn't believe that she was talking to him, so he behaved very strangely. Sillin broke the awkward silence by pointing at the fleeing mercenaries. Riffenhart asked the boys to come over for a few kind words as politely as he could. Who gave you the order? Was the first question that interested the magician. When Riffenhart saw that the soldiers were in no mood to talk, he called for his favorite non-killing club. You are very lucky that I am merciful today, the Demon King smiled. The torture was over when the moon emerged from behind the clouds. I'm asking for the last time who is behind this. Riffenhart tried to get an answer from the exhausted mercenaries. This is Tarek, the head of the Rolofane Trading Union, lives on the southern outskirts of Zeppelin. You need to leave the city through the southern gate and turn left at the fork. All three soldiers spoke at once. Riffenhart was glad to hear the name of the man who had tormented Cirrus for 10 years in his past life. He wanted to kill that bastard more than anything when he saved her. But unfortunately, when he came for Tarek's soul, he was already lying dead in his bed. Remembering this, Riffenhart ignored Roman's warnings that he should not go and take revenge on Tarek. Tarek owns the second largest trading association in the Principality of Chatan. If you do something to him, you will turn all of Chatan against you. Roman blurted out information that the magician already knew. I know exactly what that bastard is like, Riffenhart said through gritted teeth. The magician did not kill the soldiers as he had promised. He simply left them in the cold, practically naked and exhausted from torture. But, on the other hand, they could always cuddle up to each other and not die from the cold. As our heroes approached the luxurious halls of Tarek's house, terrible events were taking place inside. "They're taking a long time to deliver the Dark Elf," Beret complained. "Yeah, what is Roman digging around there for?" Tarek supported his indignation. "Who are these?" Beret asked, noticing two trembling elves on the other side of the room, and was told that they were Lantis's toys. It was very noisy outside, but Tarek decided that this was another public rally and suggested not to spoil the evening. But in fact, outside the estate guards were trying to protect the owner from harm. Each blow of the magician hit the target, and after some time all the guards were lying at his feet. While Riffenhart tried to distract himself from the thought that he wanted to kill everyone involved in this whole story, including the guards, Sillin healed the guards and erased their painful memories. "Isn't that a spell that usually heals a broken heart, making one forget unhappy love?" the magician asked, and the priest replied that there were few funny moments in battles either. "If it weren't for these skills, how would you get rid of unnecessary witnesses?" the healer asked the red-haired warrior, receiving the answer that Rifen would simply rip their heads off. "Then my memory blur spells are just right." Sillin was glad that he had managed to avoid any senseless casualties. "By the way, I want to see you kick that bastard's ass," he continued, causing the warrior to laugh. "Talcata will not let strangers through." A mighty orc appeared on the traveler's path. "You have the blood of a warrior in you, and the one you so stubbornly protect is not worth it at all," Riffenhart said disappointedly. "I am a warrior, and I have obligations." The orc stood in a fighting stance. "If I am broken, can I call myself a warrior?" "You live in slavery," the mage snapped, watching the orc's shocked face. "That man isn't even your life mentor. Even if not, a warrior must see things through to the end," the orc retorted. "Even if he is forced to." "Rifen, do you know the Orcish language?" Sillin mumbled in surprise. "He really does," Cirrus noted, and promised her master to take care of this orc. Riffenhart was doubtful, but the elf took out her saber and said that she now had a suitable weapon. "You have become stronger, weak elf," said the orc. The magician asked the healer to cover the elf, and he himself went in search of Tarek. "Strong man, are you going to ignore me and go straight to Tarek?" the orc said to the retreating Riffenhart. "Your opponent is an elf. By turning all your attention to me, you are showing disrespect to your opponent." The magician put him in his place. While wandering around the estate, Riffenhart came across a door behind which strange sounds were heard. Moreover, this floor seemed to be shrouded in a purple haze that was not observed on the others. The magician quickly realized that the fragrant haze was some kind of drug. But when he looked at what was happening inside the room, he was speechless for a moment. Bloodstains decorated the room as well as the expensive curtains. Taking a break from their perverted activities, the two sweaty bodies turned towards Riffenhart. Tarek and Beret screamed curses at the guards who let the stranger into the room. But they didn't know that the soldiers wouldn't hear their complaints for now. Riffenhart searched for words to describe his contempt for the two sweaty carcasses standing over the dead elves. "I've seen a lot of shit in my life, but you certainly won't get away with this," he roared as soon as he felt able to speak again. The box containing the drug continued to emit purple smoke. Fat bastard. Tarek must have gotten really high because he kept asking Riffenhart, "Who are you?" and calling security. Anger finally enveloped the magician when he looked again at the bloody mess on the bed. The elves had clearly been killed quite recently. What they had done with the corpses of these noble creatures up until now was beyond Riffenhart's comprehension. Why are there so many people in this world who shouldn't be left alive? The Demon King asked himself. What's going on? Why is there an intruder here, and no one has even raised the alarm outside? Where is Talcata? The fat pig squealed, trying to fight his clouded mind. What do you want? Money? He turned to Riefenhart. Or a place at the trading market, Tarek suspected, constantly thinking that Tauban could very well be plotting against him. But Cirrus put up with this wretchedness for 10 whole years, the magician muttered in frustration, while Tarek swore by the name of his trade union and promised the warrior to double the offered sum. We can draw up a contract right now. I promise I won't take revenge. The head of Rolifan squealed in confusion when the red-haired boy moved towards him and muttered something about Tarek not having changed. But this time, he would make it in time. The fat pig was not destined to understand that Riffenhart would have time to understand, because from the blow to the chest, it seemed that his heart flew out somewhere into the area of his back. And how dare you, you creeping freak, do such things to Cirrus? The magician asked. But the current Tarek had no idea who this Cirrus was. Baretu was left to watch as his comrade was brutally beaten to death by some young boy. Maybe what is happening now seems unfair to you, but now you understand how those who died by your mercy felt, Reifenhardt said, sending Tarek on his final journey. The head of the Rollfane Trading Association lay on the floor of his luxurious room, unable to take another breath, choking on his own blood. Murderer! Beret attacked Reifenhardt, only making the mage laugh, since he only heard such an insult from a murderer. Beret denied his sins and claimed to live a righteous life. Scylla and Cirrus arrived at the room in the midst of an altercation between Reifenhardt and Beret, each claiming that the other was the killer. They then saw Tarek's brutally mutilated body on the floor. This is very cruel, was all the elf could say. Those bastards deserve worse, Reifen assured her, and Scylla agreed with his statement. The priest had been traveling for a long time and had long since gotten used to such sights, which he shared with the elf so that she would not worry. Scylla and Cirrus began to praise each other in front of the mage because the elf took care of Talcata, and the healer helped, maintaining her vitality. From what his partners told him, Riffenhardt concluded that Talcata was not dead and was very glad about it. You are the slave that I returned. Beret came to his senses. Are you the one who kills children? Cirrus asked, watching as Scylla tried unsuccessfully to help the elves. Your pathetic life won't be enough to calm this child's soul, but, said the usually silent 148th. It's the least I can do, she continued, allowing Beret to see his own reflection in the surface of her sword. Red drops splashed onto the room's purple wallpaper, creating a unique pattern of sin. Help! Beret reached out to the mutilated slave. The sword pierced his body as quickly as his soul left him. Don't you dare touch her with your filthy paws, Cirrus ordered, thrusting the sword deeper so that the freak wouldn't be able to recover. Riffenhardt looked at his beloved with sympathy, not imagining how he could shield her from the pain that humanity had inflicted on her. A little later, but still in the dark night, something was happening in the snowy forests. First, the fire became visible, causing the snow on the trees to melt. And then it became clear that elves and orcs had gathered around the fire. Talcata, at Cirrus' request, counted all the orcs and elven women around the fire, and noted that since Talcata's sword was bent, Cirrus' master was now his master. Scylla was surprised that there were only elf girls and orc men around the fire, but Cirrus assured him that this was normal, since they were the ones who were in the greatest demand. The elf took a break from her conversation with the priest to watch the father and daughter reunite. Ceres thought back to Riffenhardt's fiery speech about slavery and doubted her first impression. Sorry to keep you waiting. The magician immediately appeared from the forest, as if he sensed what the elf was thinking about him. Scylla inquired what had delayed Reifen, and it turned out that the young warrior was looking for slave contracts and the seal of the head of the Rollfane trade union. The magician practically bragged that he found the documents in the safe when he broke through the wall of the office. Scylla, in his usual way, devalued his partner's achievements, calling his methods barbaric. Riffenhardt lost his temper and said that he hadn't heard the word barbarism for 50 years, and immediately regretted it, because he had attracted the attention of his already suspicious partners. So why did you bring these contracts? Scylla asked, deciding to change the subject. Listen up, everyone, Riffenhardt shouted instead of answering. If you don't like being slaves, I'll free you right now. What will you choose? There was some discussion among the elves and orcs. They did not understand the orders of the new master and what this offer of freedom meant. The priest also did not understand what was happening. So he asked the magician whether he was going to resell the slaves, to which Reifen answered negatively. Are you going to settle down and give up the life of an adventurer? Scylla asked disappointedly. The seal of Rollfane on the slave contract means that they will no longer be slaves of Tarek, the mage explained, ignoring the priest's question. It is necessary to protect them from persecution. Riefenhardt thought that freeing these boys, who had neither a home nor the will to fight alone, was just his personal whim, but it was like exposing them to another kind of danger. They needed to be trained. The night streets of Zeppelin were preparing for dawn, and did not know what news would fall upon them in the morning. Mr. Riffenhardt, aren't these the slaves of the head of Tarek? Seavolt asked, thinking about how the young master had managed to buy them all up. You'll find out a little later. I hope you can take care of them secretly, the magician asked, leaving his interlocutor no chance to say no. Very interesting news awaits you tomorrow morning. But you will have to establish the truth in this matter yourself, Riefenhardt baited. And if our secret is revealed, you alone will be under suspicion. Why are you so worried? This is a normal thing for me, the magician reassured Seavolt. Riffenhardt poured out 100 gold coins on the table in front of the head of Taobang, and said that it was for expenses for the first time. There is one place on the outskirts of Zeppelin, No one will know anything if I leave my people there with the slaves. Sivolt, who had been stunned until then, finally spoke up, taking the gold into his hands and admitting the thought that his interlocutor had robbed Tarek himself. And make sure no one touches them or treats them like slaves, Riffenhart ordered harshly. But the leader of Tauban did not argue, only agreeing that it was natural, considering how obsessed owners were with their property. The magician also asked that the money he donated be used to teach his slaves, but not the things that the pervert Tarek taught them. He talked about counting, languages, history, philosophy, and medicine, whatever he could. Why go so far as to give full lessons to slaves? The head of Taobang stared at his interlocutor in confusion. Riefenhardt assured Sivolt that the better trained the slaves were, the more useful they would be to their master. But the leader of Tauban believed that they were incapable of absorbing such knowledge. Agreeing with Riefenhardt's point that he had already made the payment, Sivolt said that he would try his best, but it would be difficult, as the mentors would refuse to train the slaves. Yes, I know very well how arrogant mentors can be, the sorcerer confirmed Sivolt's fears.